evening, Wahad. Welcome. You came to get a overview from yours truly, the honest Jew. Welcome to the 11th episode of this podcast, and this one will be the last one that will be filmed on this location. Since you're seeing this podcast, it means that whatever I had to do is finally over. So in these last few days, which I'll have to spend in the UK, why not at least film a last podcast, a full-length podcast, up until, well, I'll be getting in the summer vacation, and that being said, this automatically means that I will not have the same time remaining in order to film full-length content like this. However, I do have some ideas in mind, so there will still be some content posted, but it will be sporadic and it will be in a much shorter format. Also, well, at some point, I have an idea of trying to film something with Lucian from Freedom Alternative, but this remains to be seen at some point. First of all, depending on how our schedules tie around and when we will actually manage to meet. Also, as a change, I finally made donations possible. There is currently only Subscribestar and Ko-Fi. Links for the both, you're going to find them in the description. I've also put a donation as a minimum of, for now, of £5, but you can donate as much as you want or subscribe monthly. Particularly, Ko-Fi is pretty good at this. I'm actually glad that it's a considerable alternative to Patreon, and so far I haven't heard of people complaining about deplatforming and other things, which Patreon definitely did in the past. Suggestions regarding videos and other things that may come into your mind are accepted either via the comments to this video or via email at thehonestjew1@gmail.com, as you can see on the screen right now, or on Twitter/X. The handle is at thehonestjew1. Might I remind you please to like and subscribe this video, share it with people that you think that they may enjoy watching or listening to this sort of content. Means a lot to me, especially still in the same situation of trying to breach the barrier in the beginning of this channel with low numbers and anything else. As usual, links and timestamps for the news are in the description. Starting first now with this apparently never-ending saga of fuck-ups. CBS News. FAA investigates Boeing for falsified records on some 787 Dreamliners. After being notified by Boeing that some company employees failed to complete specific inspections on some 787 Dreamliners but report the checks as having been completed, essentially falsifying inspection records, the Federal Aviation Administration has opened a formal investigation. The inspections verify there is adequate bonding and grounding of the fasteners connecting the wings to the fuselage. The test aims to confirm that the plane is properly grounded against electrical currents like a lightning strike. A source familiar with the situation puts the potential number of aircraft involved as approximately 450, including around 60 aircraft still within Boeing's production system. The planes still in Boeing's possession are being re-inspected according to the FAA. The source briefed on the situation says Boeing engineers made an assessment that there is not an immediate safety issue because the 787 was built with multiple redundancies to protect against events like a lightning strike. As the investigation continues, the FAA will take any necessary action, as always, to ensure the safety of the flying public, an FAA spokesman said in a statement to CBS News. Being notified employees of the situation last Monday in an email from Scott Stocker, the Vice President and General Manager of the 787 program. The email, obtained by CBS News, says that Boeing's engineering team has assessed that this misconduct did not create an immediate safety of flight issue. Stocker credited a Boeing South Carolina worker for spotting the issue and reporting it. The teammate saw what appeared to be an irregularity in a required conformance test in wing body joint. He raised it with his manager, who brought it to the attention of executive leadership, Stocker wrote. After receiving the report, we quickly reviewed the matter and learned that several people had been violating company policies by not performing the required test, but recorded the work as having been completed. Stocker told employees that Boeing has a zero tolerance for not following processes designed to ensure quality and safety, and that the company is taking swift and serious corrective action with multiple teammates. That email comes less than 2 weeks after a Boeing quality engineer testified before a Senate subcommittee about concerns he says he raised about the production of the 787 Dreamliner that were dismissed by management. Boeing declined to discuss the specific numbers of aircraft involved, as it said it was still gathering information about the situation, but a potential population in the hundreds would indicate a situation that potentially had been going on for a significant period of time. At this point, the FAA has not determined there is, in fact, a safety issue with the 787 or a shortcoming in the production process. Currently, the FAA has not determined there is not an immediate safety issue with Dreamliners currently in service. The FAA investigation was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. So the more people end up digging in this shithole that apparently Boeing found itself into, or more, I am actually saying it found itself into, will be a complete lie. It's more like it actually got itself into willingly and knowingly. Here I'll bring a very good example. Back when, now, where this issue stems from. It first started after the breakup of Boeing's manufacturing assets in particular and sold to other tertiary parties. But at the same time, what ended up happening is that in the way Boeing made the contracts with those companies later on, they've also pushed significant cuts when it came to costs. And since for those essentially newly established companies, they didn't exactly have any other clients to go to in order to manufacture, not to mention, well, if we talk about airplane manufacturing, we're talking about billions of dollars in terms of tooling. And when it comes to tooling, it's not like you can manufacture a Boeing plane with Airbus tooling. You can only manufacture a Boeing plane with Boeing tooling, and that's about it. And that happened several years ago. In the end, with having these serious cutbacks when it came to the pricing offer to these companies, but also it came with much more stringent controls. Those companies obviously struggled, and just as we know, and because this is definitely not a unique case in history, well, you get what you pay for in the end. If you screw those companies in the end, and at the same time, the, those companies are simply not capable of catching up with your demands, while you're also constantly threatening them that you're going to cancel the contracts, and then you let them pretty much uh, out in the sun to dry. Well, their best interest is to still keep the manufacturing going, but it will be with certain mishaps like these. And these mishaps, especially down the chain, especially for things so complicated like airplanes, it was inevitable for something to happen sooner or later. In the end, just as I said in other podcasts, these are the consequences of the way Boeing is doing things. Personally, my question is, why the hell isn't Airbus doing the same thing? Also because Airbus operates in a much more stringent market and a much more stringent framework. And obviously, their issues are nowhere near as big as Boeing's are. And here, well, I personally blame it on my lack of vision and having this much short-sightedness. I don't know exactly who is at fault here, but considering in a traditional manner that when it comes to serious issues like these, that not only affect the reputation of a business, but at the same time also affect the manufacturing part. Mm, the best place to put the blame on is the CEO. Well, I understand that you have the responsibility, the shareholders, in order to provide them dividends with the money that you make. But there are certain limitations of how much you can cut back and what sort of strategies are you employing in order to satisfy the shareholders. Yeah, you can satisfy your shareholders now, you can satisfy your shareholders for a while, but well, with these practices, they will end up biting you in the ass soon enough. And you're already in this stage right now, and you've been for a while, as we can see. It took only that Alaska Airlines scandal for everybody to get scared of flying on Boeing planes. And that also has a knock-on effect because whatever planes from whatever generation they were affected, they had to go through supplementary and emergency safety inspections and, of course, corrections based on those newly released safety reports, which ends up delaying the production and the delivery of the planes, which in the end also has a knock-on effect of screwing the airline companies that you sold the planes to, because they've already planned several years ahead of time, depending on their carrying capacity, and suddenly they discover that well, that carrying capacity isn't there because we didn't have the planes delivered because reasons could. And even though reasons vary from time to time, it's not like with Airbus when it had its own issues with the A380 deliveries well, so many years ago. But you can see a level of transparency which apparently, at least publicly, Boeing doesn't make it shown. And it's good to point out whether they still do such a thing. Airbus was pretty transparent when it experienced quite significant delays in producing the A380s, and in public, it held a pretty transparent conversation with the buyers of the A380. See, we have these issues, we're trying to get them solved, but it has inevitable effect of you not getting your planes in the end. So we would rather provide you with a decent product rather than rush it out and then end up in a lose-lose situation where we lose a lot on a plane which wasn't truthfully that successful. And of course, the airline companies will lose because well, they are the ones flying the plane. So if anything happens with the plane, they also get the short end of the stick. Not in the case of Boeing, this is what appears to be happening. There are also other more dubious things which have happened recently. Take, for example, those two whistleblowers which found themselves self-deleted not a short while after they went on public declaring whatever they had to declare. And that also comes with really dubious circumstances which didn't take too long to go into the conspiracy territory about. Uh, I'm pretty sure quite a few of you have seen the memes with Agent 47 from Hitman being the Boeing Employee of the Month. Currently, there's apparently a third whistleblower, which for now he's still alive, which also raised concerns about other issues when it came to Boeing manufacturing. So overall, I'm not exactly sure what sort of game Boeing is playing here, but it looks like a pretty dangerous game. And sure, while their defense side is still pretty functional because their main client above anything else is the U.S. federal government. When it comes to the civilian market, well, that's a completely different story. Then in that circumstance, the demands are different, but also the demands are different when it comes to your planes, but also the demands are different from when it comes to the customers that you service, the customers being directly the airline companies, And then obviously the people that fly on those planes, which are owned or leased by the airline companies. And even though in itself, yes, statistically, flying by plane is one of the safest modes of travel, but when something goes wrong, the death rate is pretty significant. So overall, we'll be curious to keep on seeing what exactly uh, is going to be the end of this saga, because it's been going for already too long. From some perspective, I can see that the press will definitely not want to let the scandal die down because, well, it serves their interest to promote to promote panic and get clicks and get traffic on their websites. But in the end, they wouldn't have don't have gotten the traffic and the news articles to generate that traffic if things would have still went relatively fine at Boeing. So I'm just saying, how about Boeing applies the rule of cleaning your room, especially when it comes to civilian aviation. Moving on now, the New York Times. Thousands believe COVID vaccines harm them. Is anyone listening? All vaccines have at least occasional side effects, but people who say they were injured by COVID vaccines believe their cases have been ignored. Within minutes of getting the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine, Michelle Zimmerman felt pain pacing from her left arm up to her ear and down to her fingertips. Within days, she was unbearably sensitive to light and struggled to remember simple facts. She was 37 with a PhD in neuroscience, and until then could ride her bicycle 20 miles, teach a dance class and give a lecture on artificial intelligence all in the same day. Now, more than 3 years later, she lives with her parents. Eventually diagnosed with brain damage, she cannot work, drive, or even stand for long periods of time. When I let myself think about the devastation of what this has done to my life and how much I've lost, sometimes it feels even too hard to comprehend, said Dr. Zimmerman, who believes her injury is due to a contaminated vaccine batch. The cough vaccines, a triumph of science and public health, are estimated to have prevented millions of hospitalizations and deaths. Yet even the best vaccines produce rare but serious side effects. And the cough vaccines have been given to more than 270 million people in the United States in nearly 677 million doses. Dr. Zimmerman's account is among the more harrowing, but thousands of Americans believe they suffer serious side effects for following cough vaccinations. As of April, just over 13,000 vaccine injury compensation claims have been filed with the federal government, but to little avail. Only 19% have been reviewed. Only 47 of those were deemed eligible for compensation, and only 12 have been paid out at an average of about $3,600. Some scientists fear that patients with real injuries are being denied help and believe that more needs to be done to clarify the possible risks. At least long COVID has been somewhat recognized, said Akiko Iwasaki, an immunologist and vaccine expert at Yale University. But people who say they have post-vaccination injuries are just completely ignored and dismissed and gaslighted, she added. In interviews and email exchanges conducted over several months, federal health officials insisted that serious side effects were extremely rare and that their surveillance efforts were more than sufficient to detect patterns of adverse events. Hundreds of millions of people in the United States have safely received the COVID vaccines under the most intense safety monitoring in U.S. history, Jeff Nesbitt, a spokesman for the Department of Health and Human Services, said in an email statement. But in a recent interview, Dr. Janet Woodcock, a longtime leader of the Food and Drug Administration, who retired in February, said she believed that some recipients have experienced uncommon but serious and life-changing reactions beyond those described by federal agencies. I feel bad for those people, said Dr. Woodcock, who became the FDA's acting commissioner in January 2021 as the vaccines were rolling out. I believe their suffering should be acknowledged, that they have real problems, and they should be taken seriously. I'm disappointed in myself, she added. I did a lot of things I feel very good about, and this is one of the few things I feel I just didn't bring it home. Federal officials and independent scientists face a number of challenges in identifying potential vaccine side effects. The nation's fragmented healthcare system complicates detection of very rare side effects, a process that depends on an analysis of huge amounts of data. That's a difficult task when a patient may be tested for cough at Walgreens, get vaccinated at CVS, go to a local clinic for minor ailments, and seek care at the hospital for serious conditions. Each place may rely on different health record systems. There is no central repository of vaccine recipients, nor of medical records, and no easy way to pull these data. Reports to the largest federal database of so-called adverse events can be made by anyone about anything. It's not even clear what officials should be looking for. I mean, you're not going to find brain fog in the medical record or claims data, and so you're not going to find a signal that it may be linked to vaccination, Dr. Woodcock said. If such a side effect is not acknowledged by federal officials, it's because it doesn't have good research definition, she added. It isn't like malevolence in their part. The government's understaffed compensation fund has paid so little because it officially recognizes few side effects of cough vaccines, and vaccine supporters, including federal officials, worry that even a whisper of possible side effects feeds into misinformation spread by a vitriolic anti-vaccine movement. I'm not real. Patients who believe they experience serious side effects say they have received little support or acknowledgement. Sean Barkovich, 54, a nurse practitioner in New York City, who has worked on clinical trials for HIV and cough, said that ever since his first COVID shot, merely standing up sent his heart racing, a symptom suggestive of postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, a neurological disorder that some studies have linked to both the cough and, much less often, vaccination. He also experienced stinging pain in his eyes, mouth and genitals, which has abated, and tinnitus, which has not. I can't get the government to help me, Mr. Barkovich said in his fruitless pleas to federal agencies and elected representatives. I am told I'm not real. I'm told I'm rare. I'm told I'm coincidence. René France, 49, a psychiatrist, a physical therapist in Seattle, developed Bell's palsy, a form of facial paralysis, usually temporary, and a dramatic rash that neatly bisected her face. Bell's palsy is a known side effect of other vaccines, and it has been linked to cough vaccinations in some studies. But Dr. France said doctors were dismissive of any connection to the cough vaccines. The rash, a bout of shingles, debilitated her for 3 weeks, so Dr. France reported it to federal databases twice. I thought for sure someone would reach out, but no one ever did, she said. Similar sentiments were echoed in interviews conducted over more than a year with 30 people who say they had been harmed by cough shots. They described a variety of symptoms following vaccination, some neurological, some autoimmune, some cardiovascular. All said they had been turned away by physicians, told their symptoms were psychosomatic, or labeled anti-vaccine by family and friends, despite the fact that they supported vaccines. Even leading experts in vaccine science have run up against disbelief and ambivalence. Dr. Gregory Poland, 68, editor-in-chief of the journal Vaccine, said that a loud whooshing sound in his ears had accompanied every moment since his first shot, but that his entreaties to colleagues at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to explore the phenomenon, tinnitus, had led nowhere. He received polite responses to his many emails, but I just don't get any sense of movement, he said. If they have done studies, those studies should be published, Dr. Poland added. In despair that he might never hear silence again, he has sought solace in meditation and his religious faith. Dr. Buddy Creech, 50, who led several cough vaccine trials at Vanderbilt University, said his tinnitus and racing heart lasted for about a week after each shot. It's very similar to what I experienced during acute COVID back in March of 2020, Dr. Creech said. Research may ultimately find that most reported side effects are unrelated to the vaccine, he acknowledged. Many can be caused by the cough itself. Regardless, when our patients experience a side effect that may or may not be related to the vaccine, we owe it to them to investigate that as completely as we can, Dr. Creech said. Federal health officials say they do not believe that the cough vaccines cause the illnesses described by patients like Mr. Barkovich, Dr. Zillman, and Dr. France. The vaccines may cause transient reactions, such as swelling, fatigue, and fever, according to the CDC, but the agency has documented only 4 serious but rare side effects. 2 are associated with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is no longer available in the United States. Guillain-Barré syndrome, a known side effect of other vaccines, including the flu shot, and a blood clotting disorder. The CDC also links mRNA vaccines made by Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna to heart inflammation or myocarditis, especially in boys and young men. And the agency warns of anaphylaxis or severe allergic reaction, which can occur after any vaccination. Listening for signals. Agency scientists are monitoring large databases containing medical information on millions of Americans for patterns that might suggest a hitherto unknown side effect of vaccination, said Dr. Demetri Daskalakis, director of the CDC's National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases. We toe the line by reporting the signals that we think are real signals and reporting them as soon as we identify them as signals, he said. The agency systems for monitoring vaccine safety are pretty close to ideal, he said. Those national surveillance reports include the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. It is the largest database but also the least reliable. Reports of side effects can be submitted by anyone and are not vetted, so they may be subject to bias or manipulation. The system contains roughly 1 million reports regarding COVID vaccinations, the vast majority for mild effects, according to the CDC. Federal researchers also comb through databases that combine electronic health records and insurance claims on tens of millions of Americans. The scientists monitor the data for 23 conditions that may occur during following COVID vaccination. Officials remain alert to others that may pop up, Dr. Daskalaki said. But there are gaps, some experts noted. The cough shots administered at mass vaccination sites were not recorded in insurance claims databases, for example, and medical records in the United States are not centralized. It's harder to see signals when you have so many people and things are happening in different parts of the country, and they're not all collected in the same system, said Rebecca Chandler, a vaccine safety expert at the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. An expert panel convened by the National Academies concluded in April that for the vast majority of side effects, there was not enough data to accept or reject a link. Asked at a recent congressional hearing whether the nation's vaccine safety surveillance was sufficient, Dr. Peter Marks, director of the FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, said, "I do believe we could do better." A red flag. In some countries with centralized healthcare systems, officials have actively sought out reports of serious side effects of COVID vaccines and reached conclusions that the US health authorities have not. In Hong Kong, the government analyzed centralized medical records of patients after vaccination and paid people to come forward with problems. The strategy identified a lot of mild cases that other countries would not otherwise pick up, said Ian Wong, a researcher at the University of Hong Kong who led the nation's vaccine safety efforts. That included the finding that in rare instances, about 7 per million doses, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine triggered a bout of shingles serious enough to require hospitalization. The European Medicines Agency has linked the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines to facial paralysis, tingling sensations, and numbness. The EMA also counts tinnitus as a side effect of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, although the American health agencies do not. There are more than 17,000 reports of tinnitus following COVID vaccination in VAERS. Are the two linked? It's not clear. As many as 1 in 4 adults has some form of tinnitus. Stress, anxiety, grief, and aging can lead to the condition, as can infections like cough itself and the flu. There is no test or scan for tinnitus, and scientists cannot easily study it because the inner ear is tiny, delicate, and encased in bone, said Dr. Konstantina Stankovic, an otolaryngologist at Stanford University. Still, an analysis of health records from nearly 2.6 million people in the United States found that about 0.04%, or about 1,000, were diagnosed with tinnitus within 3 weeks of their first mRNA shot. In March, researchers in Australia published a link linking tinnitus and vertigo to the vaccines. The FDA is monitoring reports of tinnitus, but at this time, the available evidence does not suggest a causal association with the COVID-19 vaccines, the agency said in a statement. Despite surveillance efforts, US officials were not the first to identify a significant COVID vaccine side effect: myocarditis in young people receiving mRNA vaccines. It was Israeli authorities who first raised the alarm in April 2021. Officials in the United States said at the time that they had not seen a link. On the 22nd of May 2021, news broke that the CDC was investigating a relatively few cases of myocarditis. By June 23rd, the number of myocarditis reports in VAERS had risen to more than 1,200, a hint that it is important to tell doctors and patients what to look for. Later analysis showed that the risk for myocarditis and pericarditis, a related condition, is highest after a second dose of an mRNA cough vaccine in adolescent males aged 12 to 17. In many people, vaccine-related myocarditis is transient, but some patients continue to experience pain, breathlessness, and depression, and some show persistent changes on heart scans. The CDC has said that there were no confirmed deaths related to myocarditis, but in fact there had been several accounts of deaths reported post-vaccination. Pervasive misinformation. The rise of the anti-vaccine movement has made it difficult for scientists, in and out of government, to candidly address potential side effects, some experts said. Much of the narrative on the purported dangers of cough vaccines is patently false, or at least exaggerated, cooked up by savvy anti-vaccine campaigns. Questions about cough vaccine safety are core to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s presidential campaign. Citing debunked theories about altered DNA, Florida Surgeon General has called for a halt to cough vaccination in the state. The sheer nature of misinformation, the skill of misinformation, is staggering, and anything will be twisted to make it seem like it's not just a devastating side effect, but proof of a massive cover-up, said Dr. Joshua Sharfstein, a vice dean at Johns Hopkins University. Among the hundreds of millions of Americans who were immunized for the cough, some number would have had heart attacks or strokes anyway. Some women would have miscarried. How to distinguish those caused by the vaccine from those that are coincidences? The only way to resolve the question is intense research. But the National Institutes of Health is conducting virtually no studies on cough vaccine safety, several experts noted. William Murphy, a cancer researcher who worked at the NIH for 12 years, has been prodding several health officials to initiate those studies since 2021. The officials each responded with that very tired mantra, but the virus is worse, Dr. Murphy recalled. Yes, the virus is worse, but that doesn't obviate doing research to make sure that there may be other options. A deeper understanding of possible side effects and who is at risk for them could have implications for the design of future vaccines, or may indicate that for some young and healthy people, the benefit of cough shots may no longer outweigh the risks, as some European countries have determined. Thorough research might also speed assistance to thousands of Americans who say they were injured. The federal government has long run the National Vaccine Inquiry Compensation Program, designed to compensate people who suffer injuries after vaccination. Established more than 3 decades ago, the program sets no limit on the amounts awarded to people found to have been harmed. But cough vaccines are not covered by that fund because Congress has not made them subject to the excise tax that pays for it. Some lawmakers have introduced bills to make the change. Instead, claims regarding cough vaccines go into the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program. Intended for public health emergencies, this program has narrow criteria to pay out and sets a limit of $50,000 with stringent standards of proof. It requires applicants to prove within a year of the injury that it was the direct result of getting the cough vaccine based on compelling, reliable, valid medical and scientific evidence. The program had only 4 staff members at the beginning of the pandemic and now has 35 people evaluating claims. Still, he has only reviewed a fraction of the 13,000 claims filed and has paid out only a dozen. Dr. Ilka Warshawski, a 58-year-old pathologist, said she lost all hearing in her right ear after a cough booster shot. But hearing loss is not a recognized side effect of the cough vaccination. The compensation program for cough vaccines sets a high bar for proof, she said, yet offers little information on how to meet it. These adverse events can be debilitating and life-altering, and so it's very upsetting that they are not acknowledged or addressed. Dr. Zimmerman, the neuroscientist, submitted her application in October 2021 and provided dozens of supporting medical documents. She received a claim number only in January 2023. In adjudicating her claim for workers' compensation, Washington state officials accepted that vaccination caused her injury, but she has yet to get a decision from the federal program. One of the therapists recently told her she might never be able to live independently again. That felt like a devastating blow, Dr. Zimmerman said, but I'm trying not to lose hope that there will someday be a treatment and a way to cover it. To get this straight, you are hoping for a treatment to a vaccine which normally nobody should have ever been coerced into taking, or even much less obligated into taking it, like quite a few politicians actively shilled for when it came to this. Here I'm personally looking at, sticking here to the US, examples from Hawaii, where, where for quite a long time you had to be vaccinated if you want to travel from the US mainland into Hawaii. But overall, I'm personally not surprised. In the previous podcast, particularly the World SOFA report, there have been topics related to the cough covered entirely from all sorts of places, and there have been so many people that have raised the alarm on, first of all, how expedited the application of the vaccines has been put forward, starting first with the fact that the vaccines received emergency authorizations, and then the companies try to bullshit everybody that apparently, well, emergency authorizations they don't kind of absolve the company from going through the general safety testing and safety experiments, which generally tend to last many years, at least 5. So, so not only that happened, but looking at the way things panned out, because we are already technically 2 years and a bit out of the pandemic, more or less, depending on the country that you come from. Personally, speaking of this, well, I was personally surprised to read that apparently there is still a state in Australia that up until very recently had a vaccine mandate, when the pandemic has been technically over for about 2 years. But the vaccine mandate still remained there for God knows what reason. But even if you say that Australia is an isolated case, although it's a pretty egregious isolated case, Australia and New Zealand, well, the very few countries that managed to outdo China in terms of pandemic measures related to totalitarianism. On the other side, so going back to the vaccines, reading this article, it shows pretty clear just how profoundly corrupt, and by corrupt I mean corrupt in multiple ways. For first of all, in the way things work in the US, is particularly facing this circumstance with vaccines. The doctors and the so-called experts are not just financially corrupt, and here let's be honest, it doesn't take a lot to find out which doctor particularly shilled for having people get vaccinated, and how much money did he end up getting paid by God knows what company which shilled for the vaccines. And with very few exceptions all over the planet, and I think the only exceptions are Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines, which in the end they were traditional flu shots, which didn't exactly do much, if anything at all. But the rest, particularly the ones which were delivered in the Western worlds, all of them were full of problems. So yeah, so we got Johnson and Johnson, Moderna, the Pfizer vaccine, AstraZeneca, um, and also here to bring another extra example for those that you may not know, and this is outside the US. Back in, when was it? In 2021, there was a journalist from either the BBC or Channel 4 which after getting her second dose of an AstraZeneca vaccine, she didn't live for more than a few days after that, after getting that second dose, and died due to a blood clot found in her brain. I think it was her brain, but she did definitely die of a blood clot, which everybody assumed that it was created from having the vaccine itself, because the woman didn't exactly, at least at the surface level, did not exhibit any sort of obvious disorders or other things like that. But it's one of the clear, is one of the most transparent cases that adverse effects not only do exist, but they can be pretty dramatic. And there are some, and particularly if you get a chance to read the original article on the New York Times, the comment section of this article is an absolute goldmine. But there are also some pretty uh, sad stories written by people there, and the things that they've gone through. They've gone through themselves, or family members have gone through related to vaccines. Things like, for example, one particular one was that a woman writing about her 12-year-old son, that when he received his first dose of the vaccine, he ended up getting the vertigo so severe that he was no longer capable of going to school. And 2.5 years later, he's still not capable of going to school. And that's a real tragedy. And it's a tragedy that could have been avoided pretty easily. Let's be honest here, with the amount of propaganda, with the amount of panicardism, with the amount of lying, and with the amount of coercion and even obligation to some extent surrounding these vaccines, it's intellectually dishonest to blame it all on the anti-vaxxers, just like whatever dingus doctor mentioned from the Johns Hopkins University. Um, yes, much of the narrative on the purported dangers of COVID vaccines is patently false, or at least exaggerated, cooked up by savvy anti-vaccine campaigns. Well, truth be told, the burden of proof is on you to not to disprove them, and to show them that things are not like that. But you're not going to do that. You know why? Because you have absolutely no proof. Since the vaccines didn't go through the traditional process of first having to go through lengthy testing, and then after that go to rigorous monitoring, which takes years on end, to at least outline the potential consequences if you are to take one of these vaccines. Nobody did that. Nobody did that, but as the situation was desperate, even another doctor, when from the CDC, I think, when he referred to how the lawmakers saw the situation, but the cough is worse, while the vaccines apparently aren't. Well, if you think like that, particularly in the US, I'll personally be very happy to see in the future how you will get dragged on the seats by the people who survived the vaccine, and people who you personally as a lawmaker would have much rather had them die uh, from from either the infection itself or from another comorbidity, rather than them ending up grilling you on the street. Yeah, well, you try to save lives, but you try to save lives at all cost. Here I'll put another question. How much is one human life's worth? Pretty sure in a lot of cases, in a lot of cases where people still remained alive after getting some serious adverse effects from the cough. Some of them are in this article, but I'm pretty sure that no matter where you live, if you live particularly in the Western world, you can definitely find plenty of accounts from people that ended up getting vaccinated, and the sorts of issues that they had. And you don't need to read through hundreds or even thousands of them to draw parallels by yourself and to see if somebody had Pfizer or Moderna, which are mRNA, you're going to see some similarities between the symptoms that the people described they ended up having. If if uh, if you end up taking other more traditional vaccines like Johnson and Johnson and AstraZeneca, you will also find a pattern there of adverse side effects. And putting forward this argument that well, there are some people who suffered adverse effects from the vaccine, but you see, the vast majority is still alright. Yes, the vast majority is still alright, but you don't bother exactly with those. Those who are alright, they're people who, in a lot of circumstances, would have also survived the encounter with the virus. Well, let's be honest here, there are a lot of people walking on this planet to this day, which which definitely had the cough at some point in their lives, but they were simply just not aware of it. That also brings the discussion into another territory. Why the hell would somebody vaccinate people under the age of 45, especially people under the age of 45 who do not suffer from comorbidities like morbid obesity, uh, have heart issues or cardiovascular issues, for example? When the statistic was already pretty clear from the very first months after the pandemic began, that the vast majority of people that died happened to be very old people. And yes, even if the death of old people is a tragedy, I'll get back to this point as many times as it's necessary. You still destroyed your entire country in order to essentially let some old people live for several months more. And you not only destroyed your country, but you destroyed your economy, and then you destroyed the society, and then you destroyed the mental health of people. If if you think the post-pandemic situation, looking here at the UK, for example, mm, with all the disturbances which are still prevalent to this day, cost of living is still getting higher and higher. Of course, our government is doing the worst job possible into managing the shit that they still created in the end, with with having those furlough schemes at the beginning of the pandemic, and of course somebody had to pay for that money. So the decision was uh, let's just turn the money printer, which obviously led into quite sharp inflation, and that inflation being a hidden tax ended up screwing everybody else. But going besides that point, every country did that in order to save its old people essentially, because old people were the most at risk. There were other strategies much more capable of containing it, at least so that old people wouldn't get it. There was no need to destroy mm, the economies of people, the economy of your country, the mental sanity of people. Look, let's just start from that point in the very beginning. There was no need for that. But in the complete lack of competency and in the complete lack of any sort of vision, which would have been necessary in that moment. Well, everybody looked at what China did, and then everybody looked at what happened in Italy when they went full haywire, and then everybody copied more or less the Italian model. Or if they didn't copy the Italian model, they copied the Chinese model. And well, one thing leads to another. I still remember stories about how this idea of vaccinating yourself against the cough was sold to you as the gateway to freedom. Gateway to freedom for what? Isn't every human born through the grace of God as a free person? From a fundamental point of view, how dare you exactly say that the vaccine equals freedom? Well, yeah, it is equal freedom when you've already implemented months beforehand more and more intrusive and coercive actions, um, essentially to force people into getting vaccinated. And the motivations behind the vaccination, yeah, some were definitely the naive sort who believed that that vaccination will solve everything. Newsflash, it didn't, considering how many people got vaccinated with 2 doses, 3 doses, and 4 doses, who still managed to catch the cough. That's also another blatant lie that was sold alongside with vaccine equals freedom. That the vaccine will protect you. Uh, the vaccine will protect you. Well, it didn't, and even if in other instances people who contracted again the cough had milder symptoms. Well, excuse me, but you said that the vaccine will protect me so that I wouldn't get the cough again. And surprisingly, a lot of people who did get vaccinated managed to get the cough even more often than people who didn't. So in the end, and here let's not also mention the financial corruption, and this one not from the side of the doctors, who in most cases were directly paid by the pharma companies to shill for the vaccines. Let's give the best example possible present on the planet. Ursula von der Leyen's husband and Ursula von der Leyen herself. The entire debacle about how she's under investigation, essentially for favoring Pfizer and also mediating the vaccine sale contracts with in the name of other EU countries, and it was not just that part of mediation, but the contract itself. There is a Romanian MEP whose name is Cristian Terhes. He has a really good video in English regarding this. If you are by any chance new here and you haven't watched it. He went on the podium at the European Parliament himself, and then he showed the contract that Ursula did sign for, which had more coverings than the most top secret CIA or NSA sheet. There were entire pages blacked out from that vaccine contract, and that contract was presented to the public that yes, this is the vaccines where we, the EU, will try to save the people of the European Union from the pandemic. And of course, just like anywhere else, even the lawmakers had their own cut in their financial earnings when it came to this vaccine in itself. I know for a fact that in the former prime minister who ended up getting shafted due to the way he managed the pandemic in Romania, the was also getting a piece of the pie from from all the doses that the country contracted through the EU's vaccine purchase mechanism. And on top of that, also the number of doses that the Romanian government under him contracted and ended up being several times more than the entire population of the country. And if I remember correctly, uh, Romania is about 18 million people, but the government bought somewhere around 80 million doses, so 80 in different combinations, either Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson and Johnson, and AstraZeneca. But then AstraZeneca got taken off. We also got taken off without providing many explanations to the public why it was taken off. But particularly, they were scared of seeing already side effects, even if those weren't exactly recorded officially or they were not studied, just like how these moronic doctors try to act like soy jacks, asking you, "Where's my source? Where's my source about this?" Okay, so That being said, it's a monolith of lies, and the monolith of lies has to fall at some point. And it's already fallen, it has already been falling for a few months. But first, it began with Pfizer getting sued, both in the US and within the EU. No, definitely, Moderna has its own issues regarding this. AstraZeneca has already recently retired their COVID vaccine due to low demand, but even AstraZeneca is in itself facing a lawsuit here in the UK about several deaths and several adverse side effects to the vaccine. But overall, it shows not just how insidious pharma companies themselves are, but it also shows how the scientists who more or less they if they don't work directly for such companies like these, well, they work for sponsored institutions by these pharma companies in one way or another. How do you think they get the research money in universities in order to find also discover and experiment on all sorts of things? But in a lot of cases, the companies themselves pay for it, and that's something not inherently bad in itself. A lot of development has been done that way, and it's one of the fairest ways possible. And universities and private companies have been doing this thing for centuries. However, the difference is this time that the situation is far too unique, and things were taken way too extremely, both by lawmakers who got panicked, the vast majority of them, people who didn't back down, people who actually had their own grifts in the system and had their own financial interests. And then you have, of course, the plethora of useful idiots who shilled for the vaccine and who consumed day and night propaganda from the news, whether it was on the internet or on the phone or on the TV. And here, let's be honest, things were exactly like that. There is no way that you can argue that you're imagining things. No, everybody saw it. There is no way that you can try to appear rational to explain to me transparently that it was definitely required to show hour after hour, especially on US news, which already poisonous themselves. They used to be poisonous themselves to the population way before the pandemic, but now it's been more obvious than ever that you had to show how many people died, and you also had to mandatorily carry out a discussion about either about the number of people that died, or also bring in one of those experts in order to shill for first wearing a mask. Then a normal mask was no longer sufficient. Well, that's also another big shit pile tied to this pandemic. Those mask requirements, those mask requirements, and how exactly in the best case scenario, it helped quite a few. It helped a few people, but the vast majority not only did not get help, but they also ended up having their own sorts of health issues tied to those masks. You had other circumstances, like for example Austria, which went full haywire and required you to wear a proper FFP2 mask when you went outside. So a surgical mask would have no longer been sufficient. Let's be honest here. There will be a time when the wheels of justice, or more like the steamroller of justice, will get to these people, because what these people did, what these people talked about, and what these people lied about, and the benefits they got from lying through their teeth about it, it will come to bite them in the ass. It will, inevitably. And that's already not enough justice from my own perspective, considering how much their lies and now their denial about how things panned out during the pandemic, but also after the pandemic, there will be there are always consequences to actions like these. And right now we're talking about only people who had adverse effects to the vaccine. How many other people had their lives destroyed thanks to the pandemic measures? People, for example, who committed suicide. People, for example, who ended up turning to drug and substance abuse, alcoholism in particular. People who ended up self-isolating because they realized at one point that they were surrounded by some pretty psychopathic morons. People who you cannot exactly reason with in instances such as, well, I'm not going to go outside and wear a mask because it's simply unnatural. Aside from the fact that it doesn't work. Let's not even talk here about how many families and how many children were destroyed thanks to the pandemic measures and partly thanks to the imbecility of their parents. I'm remembering right now a really good example about a mother from the U.S. who who was essentially treating her kid like he was a prisoner. Having him isolate in his room, she was staying in another room with a mask on her face, and the only interaction with them was only probably once a week for a few minutes, because even the food would be brought to his room, just like food gets delivered to you in prison. Because apparently I don't well I it's either I don't want to get my child sick, or if I don't or if I don't want to get my child sick, I don't want the child to get me sick. Trirurilu, crocodilu. Moving on now. Business Insider. Microsoft's partnership with OpenAI was basically a bet, says CTO Kevin Scott. Microsoft's chief technology officer said partnering with OpenAI was basically a bet on Sam Altman's company. Kevin Scott gave insight into his decision-making that led to Microsoft's alliance with OpenAI in 2019 on an episode of Reid Hoffman's podcast, Possible, last week. This partnership with OpenAI was like basically a bet, saying this particular team at the time also understood that this was a game of scaling, compute, and doing incredible things with it in a very disciplined way, he said. Scott, who's been Microsoft's CTO since 2017, said he realized pretty early into his tenure that the progress of artificial intelligence was accelerating. He said that he knew that for Microsoft to remain competitive, it had to advance its infrastructure, which he started to think about how to build in 2018. In an email sent to the Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates and CEO Satya Nadella the following year, Scott said he was very, very worried about Google's AI capabilities at the time. The email, which was recently made public as part of the Department of Justice's antitrust case against Google, had the subject line Thoughts on OpenAI. It was sent just weeks before Microsoft announced its $1 billion investment in OpenAI and subsequent partnership. A large section of Scott's email was redacted. Scott also told the podcast that the key drivers behind the partnership were knowing Microsoft couldn't do everything by itself and realizing OpenAI could forecast what it could get from investing in computing. And I was like, if we work for them, they will push us to build better infrastructure and we can enable them to do their best work, he said. The information reported on Monday that Microsoft was building its own large language model to take on those from Google and OpenAI. The report said a new model, named MAA-1, would have roughly 500 billion parameters. OpenAI's GPT-4 is thought to have about 1 trillion parameters. Scott appeared to confirm the report about MAA-1 in a LinkedIn post on Monday. Microsoft and the teams making and operating things on occasion need to do their custom work, whether that's training a model from scratch or fine-tuning a model that someone else has built. He added, there will be more of this in the future too. Some of these models have names like Turing and MAI. Some, like Phi for instance, were even open source. Microsoft didn't immediately respond to a request for comment from Business Insider sent outside normal working hours. So here is the best piece of evidence that you will ever need to realize that this entire AI business is essentially a grift. It's essentially a grift, and it's a grift from the side of the company that's developing the AI, because the everywhere it's been marketed that apparently AI will be somehow easy work and changing a lot of things when it came to the work environment and to workflows and other things like that. But in reality, anybody who has used AI in one way or another has seen that it realistically isn't functioning like that. More so, if you are part of the slightly old guard of programmers, machine learning and language models are not exactly something new. They've existed in one way or another since the late 1960s, who ran on much, much less mm, machinery than what these large language models do right now. And let me be honest with you, large language LLMs do not need, in any way, shape, or form, this much infrastructure in order to function. Not to mention that it's also prohibitively expensive when it comes to using this so-called AI, especially when it comes to electricity consumption, but also the sheer infrastructure investment that you need to do. And that stems from the fact that if you want to boil it down into really simple terms, what exactly is AI? AI is just an if statement in an if statement in an if statement. That's really a bit reductio ad absurdum, but fundamentally that's exactly how it works. And as long as the money is still cheap, and as long as there are still plenty of companies which still invest in one way or another into AI, this is a bubble that will not pop anytime soon. It's just it's another continuation, another iteration of the tech bubble that we've been into ever since the mid 2000s. That's pretty much it. Okay, if you have a financial interest into seeing this bubble going because it apparently strokes your ego that your net worth is so big, fine. But that's one thing. The other thing is to shove this AI in down everybody's throats, and then pretending that it's actually a good thing that you shove it down everybody's throats. If this technology would have had its own legs to stand on, it would have definitely found its own success, just like absolutely everything else that was built and invented over the course of the humanity's history. And obviously, things that simply did not succeed, well, they withered and died. And they did not succeed. Some of them truly, but those are the exception, did not succeed because they were either way too ahead of their time or they didn't have their own purpose in that context in which they appeared. But the vast majority disappeared simply because they were in the best case useless, or in other cases even outright dangerous. And you want a good example of things that were invented and thought of as a good idea, but then suddenly disappear when people realize how dangerous it is? Well, here I'll tell you about radioactive toothpaste, which was a thing up until the beginning of World War II. People unironically clean their teeth with radioactive toothpaste. Well, why do you not find any radioactive toothpaste right now? Because people end up realizing that you don't exactly play with radioactive stuff, especially you don't put radioactive stuff in your mouth, which can lead to all sorts of disfigurement and cancers and other things like that. But sticking here to this grift called AI. So now you hear from Microsoft CTO that it was essentially a bet. What exactly does a bet entail? Well, it entails that you don't exactly have hard data, or at least hard information to support your claim that, look, we invest in this company and we build a partnership with this company because it will help us in doing this in the future. And the AI, in the way it's made, it has, in the best case scenario, some niche users, but definitely nowhere near the justified sums of money that are invested both by companies directly or also capital raised by the original companies in through other sources. And here, getting back to Sam Altman, well, isn't Sam Altman the guy that said, well, a month and a bit ago, that essentially with he would have needed somewhere around $7 trillion in order to build that monolithic artificial general intelligence that he is dreaming about. Well, excuse you, but such a thing is not possible right now, and it's definitely not possible in the future. And this entire answer boils down to math. There isn't sufficient computation power on the planet. There won't be sufficient computation power on the planet. And particularly, there won't be sufficient electricity on the planet to power such an infrastructure to build something like this. Particularly uh, when referring to neural networks, out of which AI is based on. Neural networks, if you want them to be really competitive and to replace, or at least not really replace, but have the brain processing power, so to speak, for the lack of a better word, you need a immense amount of parallelization. And that's here me discussing about parallelization at the bare metal level. How much computational power you actually need to achieve that parallelization, even if even if at some point, and even if the technology is still progressing into having smaller and smaller nodes on semiconductors, then this is the same thing that I said in other previous podcasts. So making the nodes smaller and smaller gets more and more expensive. And then it's not just that it gets more and more expensive, but those end up consuming much more power by themselves, and you also need more power in order to power the cooling that you need for them to actually perform within their parameters. If we didn't reach the theoretical limits of Moore's law, that's at least based on what other naysayers from the semiconductor industry said, we're going to reach other physical limitations when it comes to this aspect in particular. Sure, you can end up at a very high cost to make something that could be 2 nanometers or 1 nanometer, but who exactly is going to be capable of implementing that architecture based on that process node when at one point the investment in itself to get those semiconductors into your use, and then to also keep them within functional parameters, best example being cooling, that ends up getting more expensive than the money that you can actually make from those upgrades. And AI is exactly there as well. Have you seen a profitable AI company from up until this moment? No, and there is no intention for that as well. Altman himself, even if he's doing his best to try to transform OpenAI as a business in order to actually make money, mm, OpenAI in itself, and be sure that the other companies are guilty of the same thing. They're also full of dreamers who snorted a bit too much sci-fi and they lost contact with reality. Moving on now, an exclusive from Daily Mail, and Daily Mail in particular is not something which I generally want to use in a podcast, but this one was particularly interesting just to first show how horrendous the domestic security situation is in the UK, but the measures which are also taken by communities. The private police force tackling crime because police don't want to. Founder of security firm staffed by ex-flying squad cops says communities across their beat finally feel safe as they hunt burglars and shoplifters when Met refuse to investigate. A former Scotland Yard detective who leads Britain's first private police force says locals in the communities it patrols finally feel safe thanks to his staff investigating and prosecuting cases of burglary and shoplifting ditched by the Met. TMI consists of a crack team of former detectives with experience investigating major crimes including murder, terrorism, and armed robbery. They are paid by households and businesses to patrol local areas and investigate crimes. The company has now successfully brought to justice one-man crime wave, David Hanson, 44, who is the first burglar to be jailed following a private prosecution. Today, founder David McKelvey insisted the case wasn't complex, but an example of community policing of the type British police forces used to be paid for. He told Mail Online, "We have teams of bobbies and detectives on patrol constantly so they know all the prolific offenders. It was just a case of a detective seeing the CCTV and identifying the person who had committed the burglaries. They then went out and found him very quickly and detained him. It's all about community policing, having people on the streets who know their communities and keep those communities safe. Across our beat, we're seeing reductions in crimes like shoplifting. The feedback we're getting from our communities is they finally feel safe. They know we'll be here in 2 minutes, but outside of our areas, crime is booming." Hanson, who had 105 previous convictions, including 33 burglaries, broke into a Marks and Spencer store in Stratton Hill, South London, to steal 500 pounds of sirloin and T-bone steak, as well as 20 bottles of Prosecco. In order to understand this aspect, a Marks and Spencer food store is the second most expensive food chain in the UK, the first one being Waitrose. Generally, if you see in a community a Marks and Spencer or Waitrose, you realize in that moment that those communities are pretty rich to afford the food which is being sold there. But despite the serial offender being caught in the act on CCTV and the store manager offering his hands to the police, the Met refused to investigate. Instead, the case was taken on by TMI. The company has already brought more than 280 shoplifters to justice, but this was the first time it had prosecuted a burglar. Officers studied the footage of Hanson breaking through a glass window of the Marks and Spencer store before making off with pricey goods and quickly recognized him as a well-known shoplifter. They then headed to one of his local haunts before performing a citizen's arrest and getting him to admit the offense on their body-worn video, which was submitted to the court. It led to Hanson being jailed for a year for a total of 5 offenses. These included 4 burglaries and 1 assault on a Marks and Spencer employee, as the Telegraph previously reported. Mr. McKelvey said his colleagues targeted crimes that were often neglected by police, such as street robbers, pickpockets, and shoplifters, but were also targeting more serious offenses, including aggravated burglary. This is a serious offense that covers burglary carried out with a weapon and has a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. We get lots of allegations from victims of crime on a daily basis where they feel let down by the police response, Mr. McKelvey said. We are currently investigating a series of aggravated burglaries across northeast London, Essex, and Hertfordshire. TMI employs 100 bobbies, who wear police-like uniforms with red stab-proof vests, and 28 plainclothes detectives who mingle with shoppers. The Essex-based firm, which has worked with companies including Apple, Louis Vuitton, Mulberry, and Fortnum & Mason, aims to catch criminals and then take them to court through private prosecutions brought by its own lawyers. Mr. McKelvey said the company sought to work with police forces on crimes like shoplifting, but often felt disappointed by the outcome. Unfortunately, you get mixed responses from the police that vary for almost from an hour to hour basis. Some areas are absolutely brilliant, but others aren't, he said. In Hanson's case, we had the suspect and admissions, but police weren't going to do anything. He was a one-man crime wave who had to be stopped. Towns across England are increasingly turning to private police forces to patrol their high streets. In Cambridgeshire, 50 villages have hired guards for their neighbourhoods, while Sussex, city of Chichester, have also brought in private security for its businesses. Previously, TMI officers were seen tackling a group of shoplifters outside Tesco as they tried to flee with electrical goods worth more than £3,000. Last year, the firm successfully prosecuted Rushians Mardouayes, who stole more than £200 of meat from a shop in Tulse Hill, London. He was found guilty of 2 offences of burglary and 1 count of breaching a criminal order and will be sentenced at a later date. Other members of the company's investigations team include Barry Walker. According to a biography on TMI's website, he is a former Met Flying Squad member who also investigated major crimes including murder and terrorism. Meanwhile, Steve Hobbs was the senior investigating officer in more than 200 murder investigations and led the team responsible for gathering evidence to prosecute 14 terrorists in the biggest Supergrass trial in Northern Ireland's history. Other colleagues have expertise in other areas including organized crime, trading standards, and internet offenses. Some are employed to investigate murders when the victim's family wasn't happy with the original police investigation or where there has been a possible miscarriage of justice. Mr. McKelvey, who left the Met in 2010, previously told Mail Online that the lack of trust in the police was one of the factors behind the high demand for his services. I think the problem at the moment is policing has become very reactive, so all they are doing is reporting and recording crime. They're not actually going out catching villains, he said. Police numbers in London are now higher than they've ever been. But you've got a very inexperienced workforce. Morale is not good. We recently put out an advert and had 14 police officers replying. Another factor is that officers are scared to stop people and arrest people. There's a palpable fear of doing something wrong or being perceived to have done something wrong. There are serious problems in policing at the moment. I hope as much as anyone else that they get resolved because it doesn't help anybody if they don't have the trust of the public. The spread of private policing comes as the UK faces a shoplifting epidemic, with offences previously hitting a record high. The number of shoplifting incidents recently hit the highest figure on record, with a total of 430,104 offences recorded by police in the year to December 2023, up by more than a third from 315,040 in the previous 12 months. The figure is the highest since current records began in the year to March 2003, according to the Office of National Statistics. Retail bosses have accused ministers of allowing shoplifters to become effectively decriminalized, with many police officers failing to attend the majority of reports and failing to gather any evidence when they do. Private police forces have become more common in sight even outside the capital, with the historic market town of Kimbolton in Cambridgeshire hiring its own security after multiple houses were burgled in the space of a few weeks. About 50 villages in the area also hire security guards for their neighbourhoods, with their services costing households about £35 a month. A security boss said his company, Shield, which is taking over security in Kimbolton and has dozens of other towns in its books, has seen the number of inquiries from residents, farmers, and businesses increased by the day. There is just an increase in antisocial behavior full stop. Burglaries, damaging and stealing equipment, setting up cannabis factories, whatever it may be, he told Mail Online last September. There is a hell of a lot of people, even in villages, that are frightened to go out after dark. Elderly people in particular are petrified to go out after dark. He said many of his customers have lost faith in the police, who are too overstretched to deal with minor incidents. The first thing police say is anybody injured, then they say no, and so they don't come out. It's quite alarming. People are saying, I had somebody in my garden, I called the police and they didn't turn up. There seems to be a gap. During the dark hours, police are struggling to recover all the minor incidents. People want reassurance and they want people to be there. If someone calls us, we will respond to that. We'll probably send a few cars out, maybe a dog handler, and a drone straight away, and an arrest is made if it's an indictable offense. The security company has state-of-the-art drones, thermal cameras, marked cars, and dogs to try to deter crime and reassure residents in the communities it covers. Having worked with a fleet of 5 vehicles for several years, the security boss said the company has just ordered another two to cope with demand. We are even being asked to go out in daylight, he said. A lot of the villagers right know the villages don't get policed as they would like. When they are at work or go shopping in the day and their premises are left unattended, they want to have a marked vehicle in the area. It is not just residents' homes which are being targeted, but also high street businesses, he said. We have a customer who is a pharmacist who has issues with antisocial behavior every night. They'll set his alarm off and he lives in another county. It's an hour drive to get to his premises. He said farmers are also having to fork out tens of thousands for damage to their machinery and fields. Criminals are using cutting equipment to cut through gates and padlocks. They are even using drones to do their surveillance in the day, he warned. In 2019, around 140 homeowners living in Southern Cutfield, near Birmingham, decided to pay £504 a month for a team of guards to safeguard their homes 3 times a week. Members of the community connected through WhatsApp when they noticed a spike in the number of burglaries and car break-ins on the road. Some 69 of the families opted to pay an extra £10 a week for added security. John Atkins, 67, and wife Janice, 61, put forward the idea to hire a team of guards from security firm Innovative Security Control. Mrs. Atkins said, home break-ins and car thefts started happening every 4 or 5 days, and at any time of the day or night. Recently, residents have noticed a number of unknown cars driving up and the street. We felt like we were being watched. It made us scared to leave the house. Last year, a community near Liverpool that was afraid of balaclava-wearing gangs of teens brought in their own reinforcement. A father who lives in the area told the Liverpool Echo that they pay a security firm a monthly fee and are given access to a 24/7 hotline in case anything happens. The firm will conduct free patrols during the day and free patrols during the night in return. In Portsmouth, volunteer vigilantes have taken to patrolling their own city streets, equipped with body cams and stab-proof vests because their trust in police has been broken and crime has increased tenfold. Fed up with drug dealing, car thefts, and other offences, Andy Kirchner organized local residents to tackle crime because he believes there aren't enough officers to the beat. Mr. Kirchner, who owns a CCTV company, spent £2,500 of his own money to buy protective gear for the volunteers in Portsmouth, and local businesses have also donated money to the group. Equipped with body cams, high-visibility jackets, stab-proof vests, and radios, the volunteers roam the local areas at night and make reports to the police, even intervening when it is safe. Mr. Kirchner claims crime has gone up tenfold in recent years and insists his approach is now yielding results. The police have acted on the reports we have given them and made some arrests, he said. Action is being taken. The police are responding where they can, but they can't be everywhere at once. I feel sorry for them. There are nowhere near enough officers on the beat overnight. Residents are worried. I want people to feel safe in their own homes. Mr. Kirchner said he will continue the patrols due to the amount of public support, with residents support requesting patrols. So, as you have listened, this is the absolute state of the UK finds itself in. While it's true that this isn't the entirety of the UK, but there are sufficient places which have seriously gone to shit, and they have gone to shit in a particularly spectacular fashion in the span of the last 5 to 7 years. Things haven't been better even before, but the trend is pretty obvious, and the way things stand right now, they also aren't going to get any better anytime soon. But this also begs the following question. Why the hell do these people pay taxes to the government, whether they pay income tax and especially when they pay the local council taxes? What the hell do they pay them for? This is also something that I've seen in the council which I used to live before the pandemic, and which I moved back after the pandemic was over. Things have gotten noticeably worse when it came to the management of a town. And well, truth be told, the council with which I live is not exactly a single town, but it has two larger towns and several villages. In total, it's about, let me just say, about somewhere around 120,000 people. But the road quality has gotten worse. The police quality has gotten worse as well. And here I'll give you an actual example. Several streets away from me, they just discovered that there was apparently a weed plantation inside someone's house, and it's been there for quite a few years, considering the amount of tooling that they had planted there. And here I'm talking about a place which is 10 minutes away from my house. It is not exactly far or abandoned or somewhere else, and it was within a residential cul-de-sac, which made things even more surprising. It was essentially hidden in plain sight. And for anybody which is familiar with botany, and particularly botany when it comes to the funny plant, uh, you need some pretty high power sodium light in order to actually get as much harvest as possible from the buds. And those sodium lamps consume quite a lot of power. So in order to in order to have the plantation the guy had in his house, it would have been instantly obvious the moment he turned on those lamps, because the electricity usage would have skyrocketed. Sure, the electricity costs have skyrocketed, but they skyrocketed not because apparently the British people started using more. And that was a thing which apparently it became so obvious that it took them a while to realize and to actually pursue a conviction and shut down that indoor wheat plantation. Well, this is just a simple example. In the grander scheme of things, when individuals and communities end up doing better policy in which they already pay for through taxes to pay the actual police, not not be private security companies. Here I'll be probably on the first to put a question. And why the hell are you still paying taxes for? What are you exactly paying taxes for? Overall, the council management in a lot of places has gotten to the shitter. Well, you pay taxes in order to pay some police officers. Well, what for? If they don't exactly serve the community. This regarding community policing and the fact that police officers in the past they used to know their communities, and they also paid regular visits in order to understand how the people feel and what issues are they facing. Well, let me tell you, truth be told, I haven't seen those community officers being present in quite a long time on the streets in the town that I live in. The town that I live in is not exactly big, so it's not like you can't see them or they're hide somewhere. You just simply don't see them. I used to see them much more often much more often before the pandemic rather than after the pandemic. But nonetheless, this shows how far down the shitter things have gotten here. And when you are to think and to put into perspective that at least here you still have a sort of framework where you can still do community policing, even if it is with a private company. What about continental Europe, where you don't have such measures in place? You cannot, well, just the simple fact of citizens' arrest is something that barely anybody knows about as a concept, and even less to have an actual policy for an individual to be capable of producing a citizen's arrest. Even if, yes, in the UK, to commit a citizen's arrest is also something risky if you don't know the law. But hey, at least it's possible. At least it's possible, and while in other places it's not possible. This will this will divide more and more the already pretty well divided society in this country. And well, it's been a sign for quite a while, but the signs are getting more and more obvious as time passes. Mm, Particularly once more and more the politics get more polarized and the politicians will look into more favoritisms from certain special interest groups, which happen to be of certain minorities. Some who want free housing, some who want free housing and skilled buildings with towers who shut the call to prayer 5 times a day, for example. And this divide will get even greater and greater unless something is done. And something will definitely not be done because in order to do something, you need to have a vision, and you need to. But before having a vision, you first need to see reality, and reality is something which definitely the lawmakers of this country and the representatives of the people in this country they are severely lacking. But it's not like the people are blameless as well. In the end, in a democracy, people get exactly the lawmakers they deserve. In the end, they are the ones who are electing the people. It's not like, contrary to popular opinions of conspiracists, elections are are with a very high percentage sufficiently true. Um, if if the people who end up getting elected are the ones which they are not liked by the people who live in that area and who vote in that area, when you start posing them the question, but then okay, but you don't like him. What exactly have you done in order to either not get him elected or in the very least, what have you done by yourself in order to uphold the standards of your community, of your business, and to uphold your interests? All right, you haven't done anything else. Here I'll come back since yeah, this is a good tangent to also discuss about the local elections, where, to nobody's surprise, Sadiq Khan won a historic third term. He's the first mayor since the existence of Greater London who managed to win a third term, and I'm personally not surprised. I'm personally not surprised it happened, considering the sort of people who went to vote. Voter turnout was about 40%, and and it's not like you had to be physically present in order to go and vote. There was also the possibility to vote by mail, and there definitely was no excuse to not be voting, and even more so. I still remember that there are quite a lot of people who are still pissed off about things like implementing the ultra low emission zone, which screwed everybody who did not have a new enough car or a hybrid or an electric car. That measure also screwed a lot of businesses, considering the way things are set up in and around London. But in the end, it turns out that I was right. This discussion back when I used to visit quite a lot of car maintenance businesses, I always carried out the discussions with them when the topic was already pretty hot back in 2022 and 2023 when the ULEZ was already implemented. And I always pose this question: okay, you are upset about it, but what exactly are you doing? You know that the mayor of London is at fault. So in order to uphold the interests of yourself and your business, you need to do something about this. Have you done anything about that? Silence. Or if they didn't give me the silent treatment, they started coping with, well, what exactly can we do? Because that guy's a politician and I don't do politics. So, well, if you don't do politics, then the politics will do you. Congratulations. A year and a bit after that conversation, the politics did you. And this bears relevance to an even more basic fundamental concept, which pertains to how the life of any individual on this planet works, with absolute no exceptions. There are no exceptions whatsoever. You can even dare to call it an axiom. Actions have consequences, but also not having any action has consequences. And whether those consequences may be good or bad, well, that remains for you to see. But in the end, if you don't seek your own interest, especially when you know and you got sufficient mm, you got sufficient soul inside you to know exactly what is right and what is wrong, at least for the minor things. Well, if you still keep on if you still keep on ignoring and coping and pretending that nothing like this is happening, well, you will get to the point where instead of you doing life does you. Just like in the aforementioned example, when they didn't want to do even the most basic level of politics, which would have been to discuss with their customers and then try to sway them into not electing this guy again. They ended up getting done by the politics. So this is exactly how the individual functions and how the world functions. Um, you cannot exactly complain if you knew what was happening and you haven't done anything. If you don't protect your interest, nobody else will do it for you. That plain and simple. Moving on now. Politico. Top German conservative partly blames Germany and EU for Brexit. We lost patience with the special role Britain has always played in European politics. We lost patience with the special role that Britain always played in European politics, CDU leader Friedrich Merz said. Berlin and Brussels should share some of the blame for Brexit, German Christian Democratic Union leader Friedrich Merz said. In an interview with the Financial Times, the leader of Germany's main opposition party hinted that the former German Chancellor, fellow Christian Democrat Angela Merkel, although he did not mention her by name, could have done more to help the UK's then Prime Minister David Cameron win the vote. I remember that David Cameron asked for changes to EU social policy and came back to London empty-handed, Merz said, adding that the continental Europeans were not entirely blameless when it came to Brexit. We lost patience with the special role that Britain always played in European politics. We didn't do enough to help them come to a different level, to a different referendum result, he said. In January 2020, when the UK left the EU after a contentious referendum in June 2016, which the Leave campaign won by a margin of 52% to 48%. Merz, whose centre-right CDU is flying high in opinion polls, added he wanted closer ties between the UK and the EU. We have a plethora of opportunities, at least in foreign and defence policy, that we should explore together, he said. We Germans have a strategic interest in keeping the UK closely engaged to Europe. Well, if this isn't something that was already mentioned many years before, ever since the vote was carried out, and here it's worth remembering how this entire debacle began. It first started with the fishing industry in the UK. That was one of the first ones, the first great offences of the EU when it came towards Britain. So for every country within the EU, if it came to fishing in the North Sea, they had really stringent quotas implemented. Those quotas were always in a very opaque way distributed in one way or another between countries which were bordering the North Sea. But there was one exception, and that was Norway. Norway is not a country which is part of the EU, but it is a really good partner of the EU, and the country was not subject to quotas, while the rest from within the EU were. This is another good example of how egregiously bureaucratic the European Union is, and how completely detached from any basis of reality it can be. And of course, the fishing industry began really complaining. Well, you give us these really low limits of fishing quotas, while the Norwegians essentially take over our own homegrown market as well, because they don't actually have to submit to fishing quotas when it comes to their own country. And especially when it comes to our own occupation, well, we're essentially getting worked out of our own industry by somebody who is overseas. And later on, after the referendum passed, even the referendum was already very controversial in itself. Truth be told, at least let's give credit to David Cameron. He did not exactly pull a stunt after the referendum, or particularly the Tories did not pull another stunt after the referendum to organize another referendum just to be sure. That's a traditional tactic of EU and the special interest groups, which are also affiliated in one way or another to the EU. If a referendum gets organized and they don't get the right result, well, they just wait a while, they invest more money into propaganda, and then they organize a referendum a few years later when they will get the result that they wanted. Take one good example, which is also pretty close to the UK, it was the abortion referendum in Ireland several years ago. Ireland being a pretty Christian and traditionalistic country at that, where there were billions of euros of propaganda poured into for that referendum to pass. After several years earlier, before that, mm, it failed with quite a landslide, and understandably so. If you know anything about religion and how a country functions. So here we can also see in this article the sheer goal and even this guy Friedrich Merz being very well detached from reality. Yes, he admits that they have a strategic interest in keeping the UK closely engaged to Europe. Yes, I know why you do that, because you lost the financial capital. You lost the financial capital and you don't have another one. Yeah, Frankfurt is nowhere even close when it comes to money laundering compared to the city of London. Let's be honest here. That's exactly one of the things that they hurt them the most. And yeah, speaking of what I mentioned earlier about getting different referendum results, even he admitted this upfront that we didn't do enough to help them come to a different referendum result. Well, thank God, honestly, that they didn't have that they were too short-sighted back then in order to get involved into this bullshit like they always did. And the fractures have become already way too obvious. Even if, yes, to some extent, and this isn't isn't worth denying at all, because this is the truth. Yes, the UK did suffer quite a bit from the economic relationships that were broken off after Britain got out of the EU, and you still have the issue with the border with Northern Ireland, where essentially the compromise, which is still upheld to this day, is that even Northern Ireland is subjected to tariffs. It doesn't matter if, for example, the product comes from within the EU, from within UK to Northern Ireland, which is still territory of the UK, is subject to taxes because they send the virtual red line. The virtual red line is between the British island and then the Irish island, disregarding the border itself, which splits Northern Ireland and Ireland proper. And a lot of people are still really annoyed in Northern Ireland about that, and rightfully so. But here it's also worth remembering just the horrendous treatment that the UK has received during the negotiations to exit the EU. Even if exiting the EU is something which is perfectly legal, it's something called Article 50 of the Treaty of Functionality of the European Union. It's something perfectly legitimate. In the end, it was a democratic referendum, so the people wanted to. It's not like there were some politicians that wanted to. Yes, there were some politicians that wanted to, but in the end, the people have spoken. Vox populi, vox Dei. And the way the British delegation got treated during those negotiations on how to exit the EU after that. So essentially, drawing up the fine details of how will this relation be split. Essentially, what the EU did, and this is something that even that every prime minister, particularly Theresa May, mentioned, but there have been even bureaucrats from Brussels that mentioned this. Theresa May, from her side, uh, even if she didn't realistically succeed in doing much because of her own crisis of competency, but at the same time, she didn't even have who to work with properly to negotiate the final details of exiting the EU, because the EU leadership in Brussels was hell bent on punishing the UK for daring to to destabilize the unity of the European Union by exiting. Though those are the sort of people within the bureaucracy of the EU in Brussels, and right now, well, the Germans are complaining that, that apparently we did an oopsie by allowing the situation where the Britain got out of the EU. Yeah, well, especially Germans bear the most blame. Because they are essentially the main player within the EU bureaucracy. And on the second level, you also get the French, but this time the Germans do bear the most of the blame. And in continuation, looking over here, at least from this perspective, this guy is right to at least begin in one way or another to have engagements at an EU level with the UK on foreign and defense industry. Well, those are about the last fields where you can collaborate without actually calling it collaboration. At least not collaboration in the way it used to be back in the days when these countries were part of the same union. And truth be told, well, at least in both cases, either countries needs a pretty significant wake-up call. Well, yes, at a high level, the UK is definitely the more competent power when it comes to defense. The Germans also do several things good, but what the issue is with their own military that's absolutely atrocious. And even in this situation, not even the UK is in quite a sharp situation either. Just several days ago, memes surfaced on the internet regarding the data breach, which was 100% not the fault of either the Chinese or Russians or both, from the Ministry of Defense, where even the payroll accounts of soldiers and reservists managed to get extracted and leaked. And the day after, so that will be yesterday, also the border force, so the border control agency got hacked as well, and its systems were turned off. So essentially, there was no way for you to get out of the UK because the border police couldn't scan your passport. And good luck getting out without having a scanned passport. A lot of people ended up getting stuck temporarily in this country up until they managed to patch the situation up. So to some extent, I'm personally not sure why are we still even continuing to hear about the CDU, considering what sort of toxic asset Angela Merkel was. This is before bringing this mandatory reminder that Angela Merkel was a Stasi spy. By far the worst sin committed by Angela Merkel was essentially to unilaterally open up the borders of the EU to uncontrolled migration from countries which were not at war, and and the things that precipitated after that. Continuing on, also related to defense, TVP. Europe is waking up. Polish defense minister praises military response to Russia. Poland's Minister of National Defense has told a panel discussion that Europe is finally waking up to the threat posed by Russia. Delivered during a debate titled Europe in the Age of War as part of the ongoing Defense 24 Days conference, his comments come as Europe scrambles to face up to an increasingly hostile Kremlin. Poland's Minister of National Defense has told the panel discussion that Europe is finally waking up to the threat posed by Russia. Oh, Jesus. Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz was asked how self-sufficient he thought the European bloc would be in the event of war. Responding, the Minister of National Defense and Deputy Prime Minister said, after years of lethargy and misunderstanding during the first months of the war, Europe is waking up. Speaking to the panel, Kosiniak-Kamysz praised the response of several countries. The best example is France's involvement in the recent months and the increase in Great Britain's defense spending, he said. Kosiniak-Kamysz also praised the pivot made by Germany with regard to national defense. Continuing, he added that the Polish government had been deeply engaged in swaying European attitudes and credited the Minister of Foreign Affairs Radosław Sikorski and Prime Minister Donald Tusk for leading a diplomatic offensive aimed at powering up European defense. The minister also name-checked President Andrzej Duda and the head of the National Security Bureau Jacek Siewiera for their ongoing efforts to raise awareness around Europe. It all adds up to changing gears, he concluded. The EU must prioritize the defense industry way more than it used to. Truthfully, it should. But while the signals that are offered are the correct ones, it will still take quite a while because there's been a lot of inertia when it comes to focusing spending on other things rather than defense, especially after the fall of the Iron Curtain, when essentially, at least at the level of Europe, they suddenly realized that, well, we no longer consider Russia a threat, so the vast majority of the countries ended up instead of spending in defense, they ended up spending in social welfare, which is why the things are the way they are right now in Europe overall. That didn't take too long, as we can see from that fateful day on 28th of February 2022. And while some countries bear less blame because particularly the countries which used to be part on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, they didn't exactly have that much capacity and willpower to restart their defense industry. That exactly cannot be said about countries from Western Europe, particularly Germany in this case. No, Germany is that country where they need to do feasibility studies in order to do another feasibility study on how feasible it is to buy new helmets for the military. Let's not even talk about sourcing ammunition in order to keep even basic infantry trained in, and not use broomsticks where they go pop 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 instead of actually shooting. And also Germany is by far the biggest sinner out of all of them. Well, France definitely had its own issues, and the UK does have its own issues as well, but those pale in comparison to the things Germany has done. and things have gotten so ridiculous that I have personally no idea what sort of deal the Germans made with the Dutch. But you can imagine that the Dutch, being a country, being a country much smaller than Germany surface area wise, end up having more tanks, more and more functional tanks. Both tanks as an absolute number, but also as a functional number than Germany did. But in an interest to somehow coordinate operations in the future, the Dutch transferred the command of the Dutch tank battalions into the hands of the Germans, and to also mix up the few remaining German tank battalions with the Dutch tank battalions as well. But at least on the bright side, things are at least moving in the right direction. Truth be told, it's a bit too late, but it's better to be late rather than for it to never happen. There's still a lot of catch up to do. There are even more nuanced discussions to carry out here in the sheer panic, but also with a completely different defense context. And considering the sheer amount of investment that's required these days, if countries want to implement the NATO framework of having professional troops and not resorting to things like conscription, even if they were to resort to things like conscription, I wouldn't exactly be too optimistic about it, considering first the sort of people that now inhabit Europe, and here I'm not talking about the foreigners, here I'm talking about the indigenous people. They're definitely not the same as the ones that they used to exist 20, 30 years ago. The hostility towards a measure like this there is definitely significant, partly justifiable, but from my own perspective, I have a completely different rationale towards this. But nonetheless, with NATO as it is, there isn't any country sufficiently large enough to have both the manpower but also the financial power in order for that single country to do everything in one go. Even Poland, as it upped significantly its defense expenditure, rightfully so, considering that they border a Russian exclave and Belarus directly as well. Even they still find it, well, I can't exactly say difficult, but more complicated, and they will still have to rely on several assets from other NATO countries, particularly Air Force. Even now, they're making great steps towards modernizing the Polish army in itself, and they're also investing quite a bit in the Polish Navy as well. Mm, Memes aside, that's still a step in the right direction. But with the NATO doctrine the way it is, NATO doctrine is significantly air focused, and being capable to, in the case of an operation, to first be capable have enough assets to suppress air defense of the country, and even more so to maintain the air superiority. That's where the problems appear. That's something which is already too expensive for any single country, particularly in Eastern Europe. At least some sort of dealings over time were carried out between countries. Take, for example, the Romanian airspace used to depend quite a lot up until we managed to buy our own F-16s for police patrol. Romania used to rely a lot on Hungarian Air Force. And Hungarian Air Force, we relied on them because they managed to get quite a good deal from the Swedish when they bought their Saab Gripen planes, and those were sufficient for a while. up until the moment when things have gotten too hot in that part of the world. But at least to some extent, things have moved slightly earlier in the right direction. The more the warnings became clear. The annexation of Crimea was by far the most significant wake-up call which happened there. Although, although things could have definitely had a different sort of ante from the annexation of Crimea, which it didn't, especially in Western Europe. In Western Europe, no, they didn't exactly want to pay attention to what foreign diplomacies from Eastern Europe told them about how significant that event is. Particularly the Germans. The Germans just kept on going with the way they did things since the days of Adenauer, seeking more and more economic cooperation with Russia, even if they were told that you are aware of the fact that you're essentially funneling money in the Russian war machine with all these projects and with all these exchanges. Well, they didn't care. That's also part of Germanic arrogance. They didn't care what other countries told them, and Poland was the very first one to wake up at this sort of covert hostility which directly threatens the national interest of Poland. Poland also being a country which has historical memory, and they remember really clearly who exactly broke their country twice in the past. Uh, Here to go on another tangent, uh, although Germanophilia is no longer as prevalent as it used to be within Romania, here it's also worth remembering that also Germans broke our country uh, once partially once partially and in another instance totally in the two world wars which we fought against them. In one of them, in one of them in the First World War, we would have essentially become the slaves of uh, of the Central Powers, and and when we found ourselves between a rock and a hard place, whether we joined the Germans or we joined the Russians, and with the Russians we definitely did not want to join because of the annexation of Bessarabia. uh, They'd given away a part of Transylvania to Hungary, thanks to the Dictate of Vienna in 1940. Um, so at least, well, I wouldn't blame as much the Polish people of being Germanophiles, but there are still quite a lot of Germanophiles in Romania, and well, we still got to look at what sort of people the Germans are, and to realize particularly that whatever we are apparently getting from them, especially by being part of the EU, you're losing in a lot of other branches, and those losses you- you're not exactly aware of because there's also a lot of information suppression being done. You just have to look at the German Stiftungs supported by political parties in how many media conglomerates they got the claws sunk into. And even if apparently things have temporarily changed, Germany is still in the beginning phases of where it's still worth to be perceived as a Trojan horse. Continuing on now. Straits Times. Iran's capacity to move oil reliant on Malaysian providers, US official says. Uh-oh. The US sees Iran's capacity to move its oil as reliant on services providers based in Malaysia, with oil being transferred near Singapore and throughout the region, a senior US Treasury official said on May 7th. The US Treasury is increasing its focus on financing from militant groups routed throughout Southeast Asia, including through fundraising efforts and illicit sales of Iranian oil. The official told reporters during a background briefing that the US was trying to prevent Malaysia from becoming a jurisdiction where the Palestinian militant group Hamas could both raise funds and then move money. We are concerned about Hamas's capacity to fundraise in the region, including in Malaysia, so want to have a direct conversation about these concerns, the official said. The official said there was a concerning uptick in attempts by Iran and its proxies to raise funds in the region, sometimes through charities. It's appalling that they seek to take advantage of the outpouring of support for the Palestinian people to siphon money for their violent and destabilizing activities, said the official, while declining to name the suspect charities. Mr. Brian Nelson, Under Secretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, and Mr. Neil McBride, Treasury General Counsel, are in Singapore and Malaysia from May 6 to 9. The department said the visit was to advance its work in countering financing and revenue generation by Iran and its proxies. The official said the United States saw Iranian oil being transferred near Singapore and throughout the region. The capacity of Iran to move its oil has relied on sort of these types of service providers that are based in Malaysia. So we want to have a direct conversation with Malaysians about that. In December 2023, the US Treasury imposed sanctions on 4 Malaysia-based companies it accused of being fronts supporting Iran's production of drones. The official also said sanctions and export controls against Russia were seeing progress, adding that the Russian oil price cap was reducing Moscow's capacity to profit from sales of the fuel while preserving the stability of global energy markets. Singapore is a major shipping hub. Insurance and other maritime service providers operating in Singapore have warned of evasion of the price cap on Russian oil, complaining that it is difficult to confirm whether paperwork promising oil is bought at or below the $60 price cap is accurate. Oh no, so the rest of the public discovered what already people who are familiar with the area have already known for quite a few years. Essentially that Iran has been laundering not just their money, but also shipping their sanctioned oil through Malaysian companies. From my personal knowledge, I've known about this ever since the first time I ended up in Malaysia. There were quite a lot of Farsi speakers in Kuala Lumpur back in that time, and back then Iran was nowhere near as blunt or dangerous as it is now, but it was still something of a concern. When it comes to what the US official said about Hamas fundraisers being carried in Southeast Asia, well, yes, Malaysia is the central hub for it. And how do I know this? That's because surprisingly, on platforms which shouldn't have anything to do with this conflict, such as Instagram, there are quite a lot of Malaysian nationals, and but also at the same time Malaysian charities who they marketed as donating in order to support relief in Palestine. But it doesn't take you too long to look at the associates of those charities, which end up speaking Farsi, and it's something which is easily discovered. I am personally not surprised, but considering that the US Treasury is present in Southeast Asia, something significant is bound to happen from this point of view. Okay, from the perspective of the Singaporeans, they do their best to comply with the sanctions on Russian oil in particular, since yes, they are indeed a major shipping hub, and hell, Singapore has always done more or less its own thing ever since the days since it was a pirate kingdom, and the Malacca Strait is now more important than ever. But considering that essentially this U.S. Treasury delegation ended up in Kuala Lumpur in order to, well, they say in public to carry out a conversation with the Malaysians as to how exactly is Iran capable of not just selling the oil from Malaysia, but at the same time also fundraising quite a lot of money for technically Palestinians, but realistically it's Hamas because let's be honest, who exactly is Iran supporting? Oh yeah, they're not exactly giving a shit about the people from here. I'm talking about Palestinians. They care about their own lackeys, which is Hamas, after they picked up the mantle responsibility when the Saudis kicked them on the curb because they simply became way too toxic. But Iranians are not interested. Well, at least the Islamic Republic of Iran. So the government is not interested in pursuing uh, any more closer ties or more trade facilities with countries in the region, which is why they can afford to do such a thing. And to some extent, current day Iran and for millennia used to be the kingdom of Persia. Yes, for better or worse, it is quite a significant power in that area, and it's also got some pretty spicy neighbors, Turkey in particular being one. But this is the way this is the way things are. At least, but it's just good to see that well, surprisingly, bureaucrats of the U.S. state are also doing something proactive when it comes uh, well, to at least try to chip out some of Iranian activities outside of Iran, but which financially finance the regime in Tehran and their lackeys everywhere else. Moving on now, South China Morning Post. China does not want new Cold War with the US, but Donald Trump's return may intensify tit-for-tat strategy. It's from an analyst. China and the US are unlikely to engage in an ideological or proxy war, but their geopolitical rivalry may intensify if Donald Trump returns to the White House, a noted Chinese analyst said. Yan Shuitong, dean of the Institute of International Relations at China's premier Tsinghua University, said Beijing wants to avoid a new Cold War with the US, but tit-for-tat measures between the world's top two powers were unavoidable given the US deglobalization push. From the China-US summit in San Francisco last November, both sides have reached a kind of understanding. We will continue the competition, but we should prevent the war, he told the Hong Kong Forum in response to a question from the South China Morning Post on Monday. But that does not reduce the competition or the conflicts between China and the US in other fields, especially not in the domain of technology. And if Trump wins the coming election, I think China and the US will have more conflicts in the economic field. The November 15th summit saw Chinese President Xi Jinping and his US counterpart Joe Biden agree to manage differences after prolonged tensions had sparked widespread concerns over global instability. A string of high-level exchanges since that summit, including recent visits to China by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, as well as working group meetings to address contentious issues, have been seen as positive signs of the rival powers' willingness to engage. But what Beijing calls Washington's containment drive continues on all fronts. The US has taken aim at Chinese manufacturing overcapacity, moved to restrict Chinese access to sensitive technologies, and increase strategic coordination with regional allies to counter China's technological and military ambitions. Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, is set to take on Biden on the November 5 presidential election, has threatened to impose 60% tariffs on all Chinese imports if he is re-elected. Yes! After a first term marked by a range of trade tariffs on Chinese products and frequent anti-China rhetoric, Trump's campaign promise has triggered concerns over a full-blown economic war with Beijing. The comments from Yan came as Chinese Foreign Minister Ma Zhaozhu met his US counterpart Richard Verma in Beijing. Verma next travels to the Philippines, a US treaty ally that has seen tensions rise with Beijing over territorial claims in the South China Sea, with a string of high seas confrontations in recent months. At Monday's forum, hosted by the University of Hong Kong's Center of Contemporary China and the World, Yan said China would aim to avoid a new Cold War with the US while working to narrow their economic and technological gap, but would have to respond if the containment continued. China has to respond to the decoupling, de-risking policy from the US, he said, adding that when major powers resort to a tit-for-tat strategy, this creates a kind of mutual limitation. A longer-term strategic response would be for China to shape a favorable geopolitical environment for itself, Yan said, though he considered that that would be difficult as the world order is still dominated by the United States and its allies. The US-dominated order obstructs the development of China and other nations, he said. Apart from managing tensions with the US, China has also been trying to strengthen its hand by improving relations with US allies, such as Europe, and seeking the support of the Global South. She is currently on a three-nation European tour, viewed as a charm offensive to regain the trust of the continent as it mirrors many US-led trade restrictions on China, while driving a wedge between the US and its European Union and NATO allies as cracks begin to show over America's security commitment to Ukraine and Israel. China has ramped up efforts to present a united voice with the Global South, hitting out at the US position on Gaza and being vocal on justice for Palestinians. It has also sought to bolster the power of BRICS, a developing nations bloc expanded to 10 members last year and seen as a counterweight to the group of 7 industrialized nations. Europe has more impact on the world than other American traditional allies, Yan said. And it's not a secret, the Chinese government has frequently repeated that China relies heavily on the Global South states. As long as we get the support from the majority of the Global South states, and then we can have a basic political base in the world. When this guy says that apparently Europe has more impact on the world than other American traditional allies, to some extent he is right. But overall, the so-called influence of Europe as a continent pales in comparison to the US. And in the end, it's worth remembering how exactly does the current world as it is functions. The reason why China can continue existing the way it does is because the hegemony known as the USA allows it to be like that. If something were to change, for example, if the US or its allies will blockade the Pacific ports of China, China would starve in 2 weeks. It would it will starve in 2 weeks, and in a month it would have a completely different government system. So, in the grand scheme of things, China doesn't exactly have the right to complain that it's being put in a box which it wasn't the US that built around it, it's the box which China built itself around it. You just have to see at how China treats its immediate neighbors, both land borders and also sea borders. Look at the former 9 dash, current 10 dash line. And now they also claim that Taiwan, the island, but also Taiwan, the territorial waters, are rightfully part of China. Harassment against Philippine commercial vessels has only intensified in the past few months with things like outright, so it's not just harassing with water cannons, but outright use the Chinese using their frigates to crash directly into ships. And that the interest there is so that the Philippines wouldn't begin exploiting some oil and gas reserves, which are, according to the UN, within their exclusive economic zone, and they can't do that simply because China is being pretty intense in harassing absolutely everything that moves there, which is under the Philippine standard. Not to mention China is also that country which just with the stroke of a pen decided that they want to annex several hundreds of square kilometers out of Kyrgyzstan, simply because they could have they exploited a situation where Kyrgyzstan still up to this moment the, they cannot pose a sufficient threat to prevent such events from happening. And let's not even resurrect the story about how exactly China sees partnerships with the global south and other countries, particularly those countries which ended up under the Belt and Road Initiative. We will be curious to see, but currently Xi Jinping is still in his European tour. It'll be interesting to see and find out what things exactly have been discussed at those summits in the countries that he visited. Currently, being the 8th of May, I think he's in Hungary right now, but he's already been in Serbia yesterday. So, with all these being said, I am not personally surprised the things are like that, and this entire article is just a gigantic hope. It's a gigantic hope, and from my own personal perspective, Trump isn't exactly going too far. Mm, no, just even if yes, it's a campaign promise that he will impose 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, but the deglobalization was in the end something that the Chinese devised themselves unintentionally. So when the rest of the planet, thanks to the pandemic that began in China, mind you, and now there is even more and more evidence that comes up that it wasn't that the virus didn't come from a natural source, but from an actual laboratory, which was mismanaged by the Chinese. The deglobalization part was something that everybody considered intuitive when they realized just how dependent they are on China, and in the moment when China coughed, everything started going to shit, strictly on an economical and logistical point of view. And this was always the cost of centralizing manufacturing and using a singular country as as the planet's workshop. Sure, you can use a singular country as a global workshop, as long as you also have sufficient influence over it, so mishaps like these are prevented. But that's exactly not the case. In fact, I mean, the compromise of manufacturing anything in China directly is still the fact that you have to give your know-how and your trade patterns to the Chinese, and the Chinese already know how they function. They end up copying your business, and in a few years they will beat you on price, and not long after they end up buying you, the original business, and from that moment on, their entire business venture ends up being 100% legal as well. So excuse me, but what sort of country is this? The, this country, truthfully, you better be glad that it keeps on existing and functioning the way it does, because things could have been definitely much worse, considering the threat it posed and the threat it still poses. Because China is not just a problem in itself; it's also a problem through its own allies, those being Russia and Iran in particular. Where exactly do you think all the products to make those dinky Shahed drones come from? Guess what? They aren't made specifically in Iran, or not a lot of them at least. And That was a problem many years ago, at least now, even more and more entities start waking up to the fact that the China is not just a problem, but it's an ever-increasing problem. And if nothing ends up getting done about it, it's going to become a bigger problem until you suddenly find yourself that you're essentially suffered into oblivion. Moving on now to a clip from Al Jazeera regarding the elections in India. Vote Jihad as Modi raises anti-Muslim India election pitch. What's next? As the campaign targeting of Muslims becomes more direct and shrill, experts fear Modi's words could encourage violence against the community. Speaking to a saffron-clothed crowd of supporters in his home state of Gujarat earlier this week, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi turned to an increasingly favored electoral theme: how opposition parties are collaborating with Muslims to plot a takeover of the nation. The opposition alliance is asking Muslims to do vote jihad. This is new because we have so far heard about love jihad and land jihad, said Modi, referring to a string of Islamophobic conspiracy theories before emphasizing to his audience why they needed to be fearful. I hope you all know what the meaning of jihad is and against whom it is waged. As India's giant national election nears its midpoint, with the third of 7 phases of voting scheduled for May 7, Modi's rhetoric against Muslims is growing shriller. That's worrying analysts and even Muslims who backed the Prime Minister until recently, but now fear that the rhetoric risks serving as oxygen for increased physical violence against Indian Muslims. His latest remarks came after a local leader of the opposition Samajwadi Party, Maria Alam, addressed a gathering in the northern Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, asking Muslims to carry out a jihad of votes, as that is the only jihad that they could carry out to remove Modi from power. After Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party attacked her for the use of jihad in her speech, she clarified to the press that by jihad, Arabic for struggle, she was encouraging Muslim voter participation. Modi, in his speech, however, suggested that the call for vote jihad was dangerous for the country's democracy. Critics and opposition leaders, however, allege that the Prime Minister's words, targeted against India's 200 million Muslims, are what are troubling for India, especially in the middle of a tense election in which 960 million voters have registered to cast their votes. Infiltrators, invaders, looters. In a campaign speech last week, Modi equated the Muslim community with infiltrators and described them as those who have more children, pandering to a popular Hindu majoritarian trope that Muslims produce more children with the aim of eventually outnumbering Hindus in India. In reality, Muslims constitute less than 15% of the national population, and government data shows their fertility rate is going down faster than that of Hindus and other major religious groups. Those comments set off a political row, inciting sharp criticism from the opposition and sections of civil society. Nearly 20,000 citizens wrote to the Electoral Commission of India to act against the accusations of hate speech by Modi. Yet, 2 days later, on 23rd of April, Modi doubled down on his comments, claiming a conspiracy hatched by the Congress, the country's principal opposition party, and Muslims to steal Hindu wealth. I presented the truth before the nation that the Congress has hatched a deep conspiracy to snatch your property and distribute it among their special favorites, he said in reference to Muslims. Then, on April 30, the BJP published an animated campaign video on Instagram showing stereotypical portrayals of violent and greedy Muslim male raiders attacking medieval India and plundering her wealth before Modi arrives to rescue the nation. The video again peddled the Prime Minister's assertions that the Congress, if elected, will distribute Hindu wealth and property among Muslims. While former Congress Prime Minister Manmohan Singh said 18 years ago that disadvantaged Indian communities, including Muslims, should have first access to national resources, the Congress campaign manifesto does not make any reference to taking wealth away from one community to give it to another group. Other conspiracy theories that Modi has referenced publicly in recent days include the notions of love jihad, that Muslim men are marrying women from other faiths in order to convert them to Islam, and land jihad, that Muslims are hoarding land to gain control of the terrain in India. None of this is surprising to Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, a Modi biographer, who said that religious polarization has been second nature to Modi for decades. Indian democracy has been badly brutalized by the BJP and Modi, he told Al Jazeera. This is perhaps the worst time to be a Muslim in India today, who all the time now feel they are prisoners of their identity. While Instagram took down the April 30 video after multiple users reported it for hate speech, India's Electoral Commission is yet to act on complaints against Modi, leading to criticism by opposition leaders. Modi has disgraced the dignity of the Prime Minister post. His words can never be words coming out of an Indian Prime Minister's mouth, said Congress legislator Pramod Tiwari, the leader of the opposition in the upper house of the Indian Parliament. Democracy is at stake in these elections, and the Election Commission of India is sleeping over it, he said, speaking with Al Jazeera. The Congress party calls for the disqualification of Modi's candidature, and he should be barred from campaigning. Al Jazeera reached out to three BJP spokespersons for a response to the allegations against Modi, but they did not comment. Trigger more hatred. Meanwhile, critics say Modi's hateful remarks have left Muslims more vulnerable to violence. These remarks are likely to make the Hindutva workers feel vindicated due to support by the country's highest office. They would feel the patronage, said Irfan Engineer, director of the Mumbai-based Center for Study of Society and Secularism. Hindutva refers to the Hindu majoritarian ideology of the BJP and its ideological mentor, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. I hope those remarks did not trigger more hatred and violence, but that's a hope against hope. Engineer has monitored communal violence for decades and visited affected areas with fact-finding teams, he said, adding that these kinds of speeches and rallies have sparked violence in areas otherwise known for interreligious harmony. Amnesty International said it too was worried about the consequences of Modi's remarks. Institutions created to monitor such speech during elections should be working to bring to account those responsible for such remarks. However, so far, we have only seen an unfortunate condoning of such incitement and hostility by the Electoral Commission of India, said Akar Patel, the chair of the board of Amnesty International in India, in a statement to Al Jazeera. The widespread impunity signals the extension and intensification of the systematic discrimination suffered by Muslims in India. Where Modi has previously portrayed himself as the victim of opposition attacks, alluding to his childhood in relative poverty as opposed to the privilege many opposition leaders grew up with, for instance, this time he has moved on from himself and instilled a victimhood in the entire Hindu community, said the engineer. This is the ultimate point of the Hindu nationalist movement, where all Hindus are victims, and therefore you need a strong state with no place for democratic institutions, freedom of speech, or freedom of religion. Subsumed by the individual. Research suggests that, at least in some parts of India, Muslim support for BJP, though tiny, is slowly growing. It went up from under 5% in 2012 to more than 9% in 2022 in Uttar Pradesh, India's largest and most politically significant state. Yet, Mukhopadhyay, Modi's biographer, said even those Indian Muslims have supported Modi are today vulnerable. Modi will still come and attack Muslims, he said. That turned true for Usman Ghani, a young political leader from the northwestern state of Rajasthan. Ghani joined the student wing of the BJP during college and rose to become his district minority wing president. A few months ago, he welcomed Modi during the state election campaign. However, when he went for poll outreach, he said the voters made him respond to Prime Minister Modi's remarks against the community, which he called nonsense. He was expelled from the party and then was detained by the local police in the BJP-ruled state. Modi is a bigger cult than anyone has ever been in the Hindutva movement, Mukhopadhyay said. Is this an election or an individual glorification drive? The Hindutva movement has been subsumed by the individual, and it is a great paradox because, for the Sangh family, no individual is above the organization. A New Delhi-based political commentator who requested anonymity fearing repercussions to their work said Modi's focus on anti-Muslim fears could be a reaction to lower than usual voter turnouts in the first two phases of the national election. Nobody is buying Modi's economic development pitch anymore, so he is, of course, polarizing the voters. Yet, despite the record high unemployment, widening income and wealth inequality, and backsliding of them on democratic indices, polls position Modi as the favorite to return to power for a third time. If the 2014 mandate was for so-called development and the 2019 was for nationalism, now in 2024, Modi will feel more confident that he won votes for polarization, engineers said. Anti-Muslim hate now is now central to the BJP's campaign. Well, hold on a second here. It's not that Narendra Modi has an issue with Muslims, but particularly with Islam. And it's not that apparently the Hindutva movement has a problem with Islam. It's that the entirety of India has a problem with Islam. And India happens to be one of the very few countries which is relatively based on the Islam question, and who also never got a clear explanation what exactly is the fantasy when it comes to both Islamic writings and Islamic scholars as well, with Ghazwa al-Hind, which is a country known as India today, or more like the Indian subcontinent, because that's a place which has always been tried to be conquered by Muslim rulers. The Persians tried it, the Arabs tried it, and then other Aryan people ended up ruling parts of India. And in most cases, the justification was indeed to control the Ghazwa-e-Hind. So Indians have had this experience with Muslims for a very long time. Why do you think, for example, Pakistan is a country that broke off from India as soon as it could? Why do you think Bangladesh first broke off from India and then along with Pakistan and then by themselves uh, went away from Pakistan? Because Bangladesh used to be called East Pakistan for a reason. Also because yes, even if Bangladesh is a majority Muslim country, they don't exactly harbor the same radicalism as the Deobandis do in Pakistan, and the rest of and no, not the rest of the Muslims, but a good part of the Muslims do in India. And while those may sound may sound like conspiracy theories, still here we're reading from Al Jazeera, and Al Jazeera is uh, is Al Jazeera in the end. It's a Qatari news agency which also acts as Iran's mouthpiece with an obvious pro-Muslim bias at all costs. So of course they will be the first to jump on the desperation bandwagon when somebody says something Islamophobic, especially if that guy happens to be the prime minister of a country. This is politics in the end. If the lower vote to turnout ends up being true, and that's exactly the strategy that Narendra Modi tried to play, well, good for him. Welcome to practical politics. The, and he succeeds in doing it because, again, India tends to be a majority Hindu country, not thanks to the rulers of ages past. And when I'm considering the centuries of experience India and the Hindus had with the Muslims, exactly the same situation, but on a much grander scale with those Buddhists from Thailand who ended up harassing, no, actually not from Thailand, from Cambodia, who ended up harassing and then kicking out the Rohingya Muslims. Why do you think they did that? Everybody knows the pacifism employed by the Buddhists, and those Rohingya Muslims end up pissing the Buddhists off sufficiently so that they literally took up arms against them. So in the end, who exactly is in the wrong here? Is Narendra Modi exaggerating? Definitely. Does it matter? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't because he has the power. He has the power of having a majority Hindu country behind him, and uh, and in the end, uh, in the worst case scenario, he may be elected as a compromise candidate. Why do I mean a compromise candidate? Because the rest are so much worse. It's simple as that. Also regarding the takeover of Muslims, here is also another thing which unless you keep in touch or you monitor the situation in that part of the world, you can't know. The Bollywood for so many years has already been essentially Islamized, more or less, and that's definitely something which when you as being Muslim subvert the main cultural icon of India, or the main media slash cultural icon of India, that's obviously going to generate quite a lot of friction. Even if, yes, us from the West, we laugh about Indian movies having all sorts of dances and having all sorts of exaggerations when it comes to montage and filming and the drama. Uh, it's still the Bollywood is still its own powerhouse, and yes, even if a lot of that is for domestic production, is well known for domestic consumption. From this point of view, the so-called conspiracy is actually right. Did the Muslims take over Bollywood? Yes, they did. Yes, they did. There's no way that you can deny it. So overall, it remains to be seen. My belief is that yes, now Narendra Modi will win another term, but the issues with him will begin starting when he will start being again prime minister. That's as much as I got to say. As we've read in previous podcasts, uh, while India's situation is getting better, it's not getting better fast enough. It's not exactly catching up with the increasing demands of the population and with demands from other sectors. While the standard of living is still increasing, even if the wealth gap is apparently widening as well. But let's be honest, the wealth gap has always been calculated in a really stupid manner. You compare you compare the poorest person in India that may be living with $20 a month with the richest person in India. And here I mean Mukesh Ambani, who owns entire conglomerates. Or you compare them with how are they called? The family owning the Tata conglomerate. That's already a dishonest comparison to make, and less so even at the bottom level. Improvements are still being observed pretty clearly. India is no longer the country everybody used to make fun of on the internet, where they have designated shooting streets. While that still is a phenomenon, it's nowhere near as prevalent as it used to be, not by a long shot. So things definitely have improved, little by little, but they still did. Speaking of designated shooting streets, BBC, women-only museum becomes a toilet to keep men out. A museum in Australia is fighting to keep its exhibit women only after a court ordered that men should be allowed entry under anti-discrimination laws. Tasmania's Museum of Old and New Art appealed on Tuesday to reverse the ruling, arguing it took too narrow a view on women's historical and ongoing societal disadvantage and how the Ladies' Lounge can promote equal opportunity. The court issued its order in April following a gender discrimination lawsuit filed by New South Wales resident Jason Lau, who was denied entry into the lounge. Kersha Kehele, the artist behind the lounge, said that she will challenge the ruling by making the space compliant with regulations. The lounge, which contains some of the museum's most acclaimed works, from Picasso to Sidney Nolan, has been closed to the public since the court's order. Miss Keishela's plans involve transforming the velvet-clad lounge into a women's toilet and a church, which she claims will allow it to continue operating as a women-only space under legal exemptions. There is a fabulous toilet coming to the ladies' lounge, and so in that sense, the ladies' lounge will operate as a ladies' room. It's a toilet that is celebrated the world around. It is the greatest toilet, and men won't be allowed to see it, Miss Keishela said in Australian media reports. Some of the key artworks, like the ones by Picasso, will be moved into the toilet to ensure uninterrupted viewing while she applies for other exemptions. And only on Sundays, men will be allowed into the space to learn ironing and laundry folding. Women can bring in all their clean laundry, and the men can go through a series of graceful movements designed by Rinpoche and refined by Tai Chi masters to fold them, she said in an interview published by the museum external on Tuesday. Mr. Lau's lawsuit has been a blessing in disguise, she said. Thanks to the ruling, we have no choice but to open ourselves to a whole range of enriching experiences, spiritual, educational, to discover fascinating new possibilities, and to become better, she said. Ms. Keishela previously told the BBC the high-stakes case had made it feel like her artwork was coming to life, and signaled that she would fight all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary. Wow, this is definitely something that only the conspiracy theory known as Australia could have produced. A museum with Picasso pieces turned into a toilet so that it would maintain exclusivity only for women to visit it. This is also tied to another case, which I'm not exactly sure if it reached the Supreme Court in Australia, but it's one that, well, honestly, if it wasn't for Luciano, I wouldn't have known about it. It's unironically called Tickle versus Giggle. It's and the case in very short words. I'll put a video in the description to his channel so that you can watch it in more detail. It relates to, unironically, two clowns, out of which one of them was discriminated by the other clown because he turned transgender, and he no longer got jobs to attend because of his change in gender. And the first time I read this article, first I thought, well, this is discriminating the trans women. How would Miss Keishela answer when it comes to that? Now, on to serious stuff. This is nothing burger, realistically, and and in the end, yeah, probably she may hope that that the lawsuit was a blessing in disguise. But from another perspective, Mr. Lau, who filed the lawsuit, is perfectly correct. Just like men's spaces technically no longer have existed for a few decades, then why should women spaces exist? Isn't there a principle known as equal all are equal in the eyes of the law? Well, you're no longer equal if and especially you're not equal when it comes to really unimportant things like these, like you're blocking an exhibition only for ladies because you're crazy yourself, and that you have some sort of rabid feminist convictions about them. Let's be honest here. That's definitely lunacy. And from my point of view, uh, if she ends up fighting the case all the way to the Supreme Court, well, I hope she loses. Because under the principle of everybody's equal under the law, well, she's definitely asking for a privilege, and also trying to convert it into a toilet. Yeah, that's more probable. But to convert it into a church, I'm not exactly sure that will be working the way that she intended to. Here, I'm just saying. Um, But overall, the case in itself, really hilarious. This is why shit like this you're not meant to take seriously, but it's good to point and laugh at these sort of people and just how absolutely divorced from reality they are. Moving on now to the last article. Speaking of what I mentioned earlier about the lab leak theory, which used to be called a conspiracy theory, and now is getting even closer to reality as we speak. News.com.au report claims COVID-19 lab leak theory more probable than natural occurrence. What was once considered a conspiracy theory has now been floated as a more probable answer to the million-dollar COVID question. What was once considered a far-fetched conspiracy has been floated as a more probable answer to the million-dollar COVID-19 question. News.com that you get an editor. I didn't read this twice. You posted it twice. The origins of COVID-19 have been pontificated on by millions around the world after the first wave exploded through Wuhan, China in 2019. The US National Library of Medicine claimed the virus that turned planet Earth on its head originated from pangolin samples obtained by anti-smuggling operations in the Guangdong province of China. Wait, so now the bats were no longer at fault? But skeptics have been highly critical of the assumption the virus, which was highly infectious to humans, naturally developed in the wild. Fact check true. The Lancet, another major medical journal, boldly proclaimed that those suggesting the virus originated from a laboratory were attempting to manipulate public opinion with political language. Really? Peer-reviewed evidence available to the public points to the hypothesis that SARS-CoV-2 emerged as a result of spillover into humans from a natural origin, The Lancet published in 2023. But now, a major scientific paper led by Australian pandemic expert Professor Raina McIntyre suggests that a lab leak is actually equally or more probable than COVID-19 springing from nature. The paper, featuring scientists from the Kirby Institute at the University of New South Wales, says that while a lab leak theory is more plausible, the true origin of a pandemic may never be confirmed. The research used in the Grunow-Finke tool, an epidemiological risk scoring method, contrasting with the genetic analysis methods more commonly used to investigate the virus's origins. The natural origin of SARS-CoV-2 is plausible, and our application of the Grunow-Finke tool suggests it is equally or more probable than a natural origin, although both remain possible, the researchers wrote. The gathering of intelligence may include open source, signals or satellite intelligence, political factors, as well as other detective work to piece together the complex question of the origin of SARS-CoV-2. This would include full records of viruses housed at the relevant laboratories, of experiments conducted, and records of accidents and illness among staff. The question of origin cannot be answered solely by phylogenetic analysis, as viruses resulting from gain-of-function research using serial passage in an animal model cannot be easily distinguished from naturally emerged ones. This analysis is presented against the backdrop of widespread dismissal of the lab leak hypothesis in scientific circles and by the World Health Organization, which deemed a leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology extremely unlikely. Oh, so you don't say it was impossible, you just say extremely unlikely. The study analyzed various factors, including the peculiar biological characteristics of SARS-CoV-2, its rapid human-to-human transmission rate, and unusual actions at the Wuhan Institute of Virology prior to the outbreak, such as military control takeover and removal of a large virus database from public access. The paper's findings, suggesting a 68% likelihood of an unnatural origin of SARS-CoV-2 based on the modified Grunow-Finke tool, contrast sharply with other scientific opinions and WHO conclusions. The research has been criticized by some international scientists, including Alice Hughes from the University of Hong Kong, who labeled the analysis method as potentially dangerous and misleading due to its subjective nature and reliance on conjecture. As the world emerges from one of the most destabilizing periods in recent history, more and more information about the potential cause of the pandemic has risen to surface. In November 2023, a whistleblower came forward to claim CIA analysts who favored the lab leak theory were bribed to change their position. The bribe was allegedly made to take the focus off China and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The National Intelligence Council's Director for Global Health Security, Adrian Keane, worked as an independent consultant for the WHO from 2016. Former Acting Assistant Secretary of State Thomas DiNanno said that Ms. Keane tried to push COVID-19 was a natural occurrence rather than a lab leak. I had found out that apparently she was an outside advisor also to the World Health Agency. They are a political agency, they are a UN agency, Mr. DiNanno said. It's not just not appropriate to do work for a foreign power, and that would include in the United Nations. A few months prior, a report claimed that COVID-19's patient zero was a Wuhan scientist carrying out experiments on souped-up coronaviruses. According to the report, the scientist, Ben Hu, was conducting risky tests at the Wuhan Institute of Virology with two colleagues, Pin Yu and Yan Zhu. It's understood that all three fell ill with COVID-like symptoms and needed hospital care weeks before China disclosed the virus outbreak to the world. A bombshell report by journalists Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi alleged the scientists were experimenting on coronaviruses when they became sick in 2019. Many experts and intelligence officials have long suspected scientists at the lab accidentally spread COVID-19 during so-called gain-of-function experiments on bat coronaviruses. The naming of patient zero could be the so-called smoking gun, adding to mounting circumstantial evidence of a lab leak. It is not clear who in the US government had the intelligence about the sick lab workers, how long they had it, and why it was not shared to the public. Jamie Metzel, a former member of the World Health Organization Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing, described it as a possible game changer. It's a game changer if it can be proven that WHO got sick of COVID before anyone else, he said. That would be the smoking gun. WHO was lead hands-on researcher in virologist Xi Jingli's lab. So now, here you have the missing pieces, and referring to, oh my God, the Wuhan Honk organization said that, well, it's extremely unlikely for it to be a lab leak. Well, let me just remember this thing. Wasn't the WHO the main financier of the WHO before the pandemic, and also during the pandemic up until very recently, the biggest financier was China, and that guy Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus was directly anointed by the Chinese for him to take control of the WHO. So of course he's the one that essentially called the shots and parroted absolutely everything that the CCP was funneling to him, just so that every institution possible and every sort of string of influence will try to divert away the public opinion from, okay, it came out of China. Why did it come out of China and why is it spreading so fast? This is definitely the smoking gun, and currently we still have no concrete idea. And it's a possibility that we may also not be able to find, because in order to be sure, it will require doing a forensic audit in Wuhan, in China. And so first of all, that will not happen because the CCP will definitely not agree to something like this. And secondly, if they do agree to something like this, they'll 100% scrub every sort of record possible in order to prevent anybody getting the conclusion that it was actually a lab leak. But from my perspective, it definitely sounds like the lab leak is more probable because trying to blame pangolins for carrying a highly infectious virus, and the highly infectious virus that proved to be so efficient and so rapidly mutating, there's something definitely fishy there. There's something definitely fishy there because yes, even if coronaviruses, when it comes to their sizes, they are quite large. This coronavirus it also exhibited a size larger than what would normally be the naturally occurring coronaviruses. And yes, even naturally occurring coronaviruses, yes, they do tend to have they do tend to be relative infections. And indeed, in China, but not just in China, but also in the southern parts of Russia, but also in Ukraine, there are plenty of natural reservoirs where the coronaviruses may come from. But overall, it's still a pretty high jump, and it's definitely not just me who has this feeling that we've all been bullshitted. And while pretty sure intelligence agencies do have some information about related to this lab leak theory. I'm pretty sure they're still going to hold to that intelligence because that can definitely be used as a really powerful bargaining tool whenever China may happen in the future to overstep its boundaries. And when it oversteps its boundaries, it's good to have something that will put it in place. If you don't do what we say, we're going to release this to the larger public. Good luck you justifying to the rest of the planet that you essentially lie to everybody and destroy the lives of everybody. Even if even if the Chinese cannot be directly blamed for destroying people's lives, that's how is it going to be perceived. And even if China is a big country with 1 billion and change people, the rest of the planet is the other seven. What are you going to do then? You're going to lose by numbers. Say even if you take out half of the population, well, you're still outnumbered 3 to 1, and they'll be very upset because the traumas of the pandemic, they're not going to go anytime soon. And this is something plainly obvious even to this day, 2 years after the pandemic is over. You still see plenty of people who are not old, and at least in the case of old people, there could be some justification as to why they will wear masks. Well, you still see plenty of young people who still wear masks to this day. When when this subject has been beaten to death already, especially during the pandemic, but even after the pandemic, that the masks are useless against the virus. If you want to, if you want to protect yourself against the virus, you get yourself an virus suit. But good luck having a normal life after that, because you'll be essentially be living in a literal bubble. That's the best way to protect yourself against a virus like a coronavirus, and that's definitely not sustainable because you cannot live by yourself in an virus suit like that. And if you by any chance if you're that crazy and you're listening to this and you want to do this experiment, I highly suggest you do not exceed 2 weeks of living in an enviro suit, because your own immune system will lose its training because it's no longer interacting with the environment. And in the moment when you would get out of that enviro suit, you will start invariably having all sorts of funny health issues. And if you're very lucky, you could have some health issues that could actually put you in hospital. If you're very unlucky, you may actually end up getting something that can legitimately kill you. And yeah, the virus tends to be the most efficient because it's also the best when in order to isolate you from the environment around you. There have been plenty of people, I myself included, when after wearing artificial ventilators due to the things that I used to do back then, and I had to wear them constantly for anywhere between 8 to 10 hours a day over a period of at least 2 weeks. Guess what? I got an infectious disease back then, which put me in the hospital. And there are others who worked in similar fields to mine who also had to wear respirators or legit FFP2 masks, who also went through a similar thing. So this is the situation as it is. This is about it from the 11th episode. Well, thank you very much for watching. Now I can finally say Blusugip Shekelim, and any sum of money would greatly help me, as you may know, being a student, and most of you have been students. Well, it's not exactly a cheap life, and you see where I'm living, and I'm not exactly spending time in a hotel room. So any sort of money would definitely help in keeping me afloat and in keeping this channel afloat when in the future, granted, if if sufficient donations come on the way, I'll definitely invest them back into the channel. I mean, to getting better hardware. They'll definitely not be stuck with recording with these headphones at really mediocre audio quality, but good enough for government work. This is the best I can do, and that'll be the first. Honestly, that'll be the first thing that I would invest into getting some quality microphones first of all. So, well, second will be to get a better camera, not to use my phone as a placeholder. Again, this is best that can be done. Aside from that, just as I mentioned, over the course of the next 4 months, content will be sporadic. It's not going to be announced, or if it's going to be announced, it may be announced to a bare few people. But other than that, now it's more important than ever for you to be subscribed, so that and to also press the notification icon, so that you will actually be announced by YouTube when I will be posting new content. This was about it from this episode. Last from this location. Thank you very much for watching, and cheers.